Start again. Take two. Hey guys, good evening. Thank you for coming. Thank you to whoever's watching us on Facebook. My name is Cindy, and we're going to go ahead and get started with our special meeting for the Fountain Lake School Board of Education. And it's 5 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, what we'd like to do tonight is kind of review our Ready for Learning plan. In the agenda, item 1 is the Fountain Lake School District Ready for Learning plan. We'll follow that by public comments and allow for those who have any questions specifically to the plan to address any questions, and if those questions become repetitive or we can't answer them, we'll kind of follow up and take notes there. And then we'll proceed to item 2, which is personnel. So let's begin by just reviewing our plan. Kind of go down through there, and you can see just in an overview within my message as school superintendent, we've had roughly 40 individuals involved to certain degrees in terms of the development of the plan and each of the areas of focus. We've had working committees and a guiding coalition of individuals. I see some of our guiding coalition members here present as parents, along with, we had a couple of board members served in that regard. They kind of continued to update. We have developed our plan based on the recommendations of the Arkansas Department of Health and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. It was back in the month of mid-May to late May, we started getting specific guidance towards a school reopening. And so we've spent roughly the last 6 to 8 weeks kind of reviewing the details of our plan. Just so Mr. Campbell and I kind of stay on the same page here, I'm looking at the introduction. Is that where you're at, sir? So in the context of the introduction, we were looking at a balance of safety first and foremost for all participants, with that being participants such as parents, grandparents, children coming to school, ensuring that we wanted to design some element of academic integrity into this process as we reopen our schools, provide appropriate degrees of support. And then, of course, probably one of our greatest challenges is facilitating equity among our entire student population based on whether they have connectivity or have no connectivity. So in the framing of that, kind of gets us to page 5, and probably one of the things that initially we looked at on June the 24th, we sent out something initially in writing that kind of conveyed the direction we would be taking with social distancing and a balance of using face coverings to move our students throughout the campus. Since the inception of the district operations and the fiscal governance, when I've been talking to the board in May, June, or July, one of our number one objectives has been any child that would like to come to school 5 days a week is given that opportunity. And so when you try to condition the environment where you schedule, where if a child wants to come every day, and you think about the space that we have available on our campus, proximity of buildings, width of hallways, looking at square footage within different classrooms, we advised early on for us to provide that as an opportunity for all families to re-enter into education. A face covering would have to be a part of that solution. Since that point in time, the governor has come forth and indicated a face covering being a requirement in the context of individuals in a public setting. So it definitely applies to us in a public school. So you can see there in the purple area, what we're looking at doing right now is having face coverings in grades 4 through 12, and that decision is being centered around a couple of things. One, we feel as though to a lot of those grade levels, exchange and trade classes throughout the day. The other thing about the majority of those students are at a level of maturity to where we feel like they could use a face covering and actually be able to use it within their school day. Our staff and administration has had a lot of discussion around whether a kindergartner or a first grader could wear a face covering effectively throughout the school day. Currently, our position is grades 4 through 12 will wear a face covering, and we're highly recommending that any other student that comes to school wear a face covering but would not be required. So that's kind of the position our district has taken at this point in time, and that's in the very first paragraph in the purple area. When we look at the visitors attending and being on campus, the first thing that we have to look at is quite frankly restricting the number of visitors that we have on campus. Just because the fewer number of people we have on campus, it diminishes the likelihood of potential spread, community spread within the campus. So visitors will be screened at entry points. We do have tablets at each of our office areas, and so that will allow for those individuals to be screened if they're going to be allowed to actually enter into the offices. We do have plexiglass or a barrier between each entry point, as we did a portion of that work for school safety measures, totally on a different frame, and now we're dealing with trying to kind of control a virus or the transmission of airborne particles in that regard. So that's kind of the framing of visitors. We're looking at really not traveling extensively, and so we've thought at this point in time for this school year that any workshops, any conferences, anything that someone's going to is going to have to be in-state, and so we're restricting any out-of-state travel. Other areas that's been quite a bit of discussion is around employee and student health screening protocols. These are all symptoms associated potentially with COVID, and as we've had the discussions, there's a lot of symptoms listed here that when we get into flu season, we won't know what it is. But we do have to look at each of these symptoms as though it's a COVID-19 related symptom. At this point in time, we have to rely heavily upon our parents. There is no penalty in terms of attendance if your child is not feeling well, or maybe you might think that they're symptomatic. We highly encourage and recommend you keep them at home until you are very certain that those children are not symptomatic. If they come to school and exhibit any signs or symptoms whatsoever, they're going to go to the nurse's office, be screened, and if they have any kind of a temperature, be sent home and then be put into more of a periodic check prior to reentry. So relying heavily upon the families to give consideration into that and not send their children to school if they're sick in that regard. That's really all I have here on page 5. Mr. Campbell, is there anything you'd want to add to that? The next area is facilities and transportation. This is an area where I'll just kind of go through the alignment. This year we're going to ask that the elementary car riders, pre-K through 4th grade, will all drop off at the awning area by the library. So they're all going to be dropping in that area. We'll be encouraging them to pull in down by the administration building just like they pick up in the afternoon. That's where the lineup will be in the morning for a drop-off over here at the awning area. Along with that, parents this year, you know, our first week of school is really a transitional time every year. We're very concerned about the opening because typically we've had a lot of parents make sure their children are getting where they need to be, and this year due to COVID-19 and our reopening plans, parents and guardians will not be able to accompany their children into the buildings. So we're going to have to make sure that we lay out the framework of where they're going. We'll have a a lot of staff assigned to assist those younger children to their locations. Along with that, school offices will require physical distancing and wearing of masks. The bus transportation will not be available this year to preschool students based on the guidelines and the number of space on the school buses. So if you do plan on participating in our preschool program, you need to prepare to have morning and afternoon transportation as part of that protocol. I didn't mention the logistics around the public reception desks, the school entrances, and our, really it's about education. I would tell you that, a face covering is nothing more than a deterrent and a possible tool. It's not going to save the day, but if we use it when we're moving, that's going to be what we teach. And so if social distancing can be accomplished in a classroom setting, then we want our students to be able to remove the face covering. I have had to wear one of these face coverings all day because the department required during our PD that the teachers, whether they could social distance or not, you had to wear the face covering. So we had teachers that wore it all day long, and they know what it feels like to wear it from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, and it's not very comfortable. And so we're really thinking about different ways to social distance, at times go outside when we can, if we have a large classroom setting, accommodating each and every element of that balance of what's going on in the classroom and what's going on with our virtual learners. That'll be a challenge for that we'll have to figure out. We're not going to know that day one. But social distancing, that's going to be kind of what we use as kind of a point of terminology, and the more our community embraces this process, the less likelihood that we'll have to self-quarantine large groups of students for 14 days, because every test positive comes with an action and a reaction that we'll get to a little later on in our plan. Cleaning and disinfecting, I would tell you that I feel very confident that our staff that cleans our buildings and the tools that we have available to us and the routines that we had even pre-COVID were solid. We've extended and made those further. Just what a student may experience is we'll have bottles of hand sanitizer at the doorways of each room, and so teachers were highly encouraging when kids enter, they get hand sanitizer upon entry, and for any class that moves, then we're going to have to ask our students to help us with the spraying of each desk, because we are required to wipe down desks every time students move, and we do not feel that we can staff accordingly without the help of our students to even make that a possibility. So if you can imagine, if you're going to go to 6 different classes and you have 6 class changes or 8 class changes, every time students move to a new location, we have to wipe down the space, and we intend to do that with the group that's leaving and then use the hand sanitizer upon the group that's entering. So that's kind of what we begin to visualize as that routine, trying to move students within the day. We've looked at moving the teacher, and in some instances that may work, but it won't work across the board, because our kids have a wide array of needs, different types of courses, and with that, it's just unrealistic to think that we can move teachers and not move students without really grouping students, and they never have any interaction with any other individuals. So that's anything else there on that page, anything with classroom arrangement? Highly encouraging, of course, hand washing. I've kind of talked about the use of the face covering. It'll be worn. It'll be a component of the dress code. We'll have that a part of the dress code, And it's really, once you institute a requirement, then you move into the monitoring and implementation of it. And that'll be a whole challenge itself is anytime you think about, we'll probably have roughly 1,000 students that will probably attend school this year. That's kind of where the estimate is running. And so managing that in a K-12 environment and then requiring that from a 4th grade through 12th grade when students are moving, utilizing that face covering as a component of protection for not only students but also staff. Water access, we have to unhook all of our water fountains cannot be used. If we can get bottle dispensers in, then bottle dispensing components of the water fountains are allowable, but to actually go up, you've been in different locations and saw that all the water fountains are taped off per health department guidelines.
But we've ordered enough of those?
Well, as you can imagine, everybody in the country wants them right now. So as far as the status of them, we started that process of attempting to order. We had at least 1 or 2 in the middle school. Hayden, where are we at? And I'll repeat it, or go ahead, you got a microphone.
We have ordered 5 of the water dispensers and going through hardware plumbing on that, and they just have not arrived yet. So we're looking at different measures for elementary, maybe water bottles or refillable water bottles right now. Katie and I are working on that. Pretty much everywhere else is in really good shape. Our cafeterias, our PE gyms, middle school, high school has the dispensers. We do have 5 on order, so hopefully those do come in time, or we'll kind of repunt and figure out a different game plan.
So that's, I think even with the dispensary water bottle stations, it's still going to be the logistics of that, and so that'll probably end up looking a little bit different, where depending on the time of the year and student flow, they may be bringing a water bottle to school. That type of thing will probably be a realistic part of the school day. As far as food service is concerned, that was probably our initial in May, what are we going to do? And so we just knew that we did not have the square footage space to social distance students and allow for them to eat meals with our current cafeteria arrangement. We have the elementary side of the cafeteria, the secondary side of the cafeteria. We have 1 kitchen for roughly the 1,400 students, and so that's an area where part of our planning, we've been wanting to provide some solutions. So what we had to do for this year, because we don't have time to build any space, we are closing the PE building. We renovated it in the spring based on any large space areas. If you've noticed, the gymnasiums, the PE building, we've tried to condition those spaces because of these types of events. If it gets to a point where we have to further social distance, we could go into and take a portion of additional space in those large space areas if needed, if they're conditioned. So the PE building will be used for cafeteria purposes. So we'll have it set up with tables in there. And so what that will probably look like is students picking up either a box lunch or a tray, whatever that meal of the day is. The first thing I would tell you is the variety that our kids have had in the past will not be the same, because we just had a lot of options. Kids could go through the line, pick the elements that made up their meal, and be able to mix and match that to create a qualifying meal. And if you've noticed, there's not opportunities for salad bars. Everything's going to probably have to move to a certain element of pre-packaging. All of our salads will be pre-packaged and other elements. And so sometimes that hurts participation rates, because kids do like to pick what they want to eat. And so that'll be limited a little bit, but they can, once they get their meal in the original, in the cafeteria area, the first groups will walk down to the PE building, and I believe that is going to be structured from 5th grade up. We are planning to keep all of the younger elementary children in proximity to the cafeteria, and the principals have kind of laid out a plan to where we think we can feed them still. All students have an opportunity for a meal, and still be in that 10:45 to 1 o'clock range. Is that a fair statement over there? Is that kind of where we're at? Okay, that's kind of what the administration is alluding to. So we've been able to put something together that we're still eating in a realistic time frame without eating too late or having to eat too early for lunch. Other areas within lunch, this is probably a pretty big one that we'll have to get used to. We printed ID cards for all students, and so their method of payment will be scanning through an ID card, where before our kids would just go and they knew their number and they'd punch the pad and go to the next person. We can't have everyone touching the pad, so we have to have ID cards now for scanning purposes, so all of our students will have to hang on to their ID card in order to be able to identify who they are for payment of meals. And that's whether they're getting a free lunch or reduced lunch or a full pay, they'll still scan, because we don't know, which of those three options that individual will be in that regard. Anything else with food service, Hayden?
Will the youngest children also have an ID card, like kindergartners and first graders?
I've asked Katie about that, and I think they've had them in the past in their processing. So they have had them in the past, so they think they have a way where they can make it work.
I was just thinking that might be hard to keep up with.
Yes.
Doctor, the My School Bucks item, the last bullet there, to limit the transition of exchange of cash.
So I think everything will be payment electronically is what you're alluding
It's
to.
what we're encouraging,
Yeah.
yes, sir.
We do have and plan to set up a method. It's a little bit unclear, but we're going to provide an opportunity for meal pickups on Mondays and Thursdays of every week for students who are going to remain full-time virtual. We will have roughly, at this point, 25% of our student population is planning on 100% virtual. And so we want to provide meal opportunities for individuals who are not planning to come to school at all. And so that is definitely something that we're trying to plan for, and we'll work out the logistics of that. Kind of next there at the bottom, page 8, is transportation. Looking at transportation, we have really had a lot of discussions around this topic. One, we know that we have children waiting at bus stops where parents, quite frankly, the older siblings kind of taking care of the others, and so they're getting on the bus and they're coming to school. Mom and dad may be going to work, and that's all well and good, but we don't feel comfortable screening students logistically getting onto the bus any more than we do everyone coming in different doors into our buildings. And so what we are requiring, because social distancing will not be an option on a bus, is you're going to have to wear a mask kindergarten through 12th grade if you're going to ride a school bus. And so anyone that's bus riders needs to plan for that. We did mention that preschool students will not have access to transportation this year. And then the other thing with that is when I think about that overall bus ride, we'll probably have to have seating charts in a lot more locations, whether that be the bus, the cafeteria, and it's really not so much for student behavior as much as it would be as if we have to contact trace a test positive in our school setting. So we have to really think about the logistics of the freedom of movement and balance that in a way to where the kid gets to have a great experience at school under a pandemic, these constraints that we have before us and guidelines that are set forth, but do that in a realistic approach and allow for students to have some interactions, because this process that we're laying out allows for students to return to school, but it does not allow for the same level of social interaction that our kids desperately they enjoy and they need. And so we have concerns that we want to And we feel like the mask would be a tool to allow for an element of ongoing interaction in different settings. So as far as the bus is concerned, the buses will load and unload this year over on Faison Drive. So they'll be over on the drive. If you've been seeing the road work, this year will be kind of a tough year for us, but we're encouraging as many people as possible, if they can, make arrangements to bring their children to school. We're encouraging that. We are going to be providing K-12 transportation for anyone who wants it. But in that same context, we know that when you put 45, 50, sometimes 60 students on a school bus, you're going to have a couple of kids per seat minimum. Any comments regarding transportation or questions from the board?
Is that regardless if they have the preschool, if they have siblings?
Yeah, we're looking at just the management of the preschool, is whether they have siblings or not, is where we had initially thought, just because of trying to get a preschooler. In many instances, what we have is a preschooler doesn't get where they're supposed to be easily. So we just have real concerns with, we got to get them into the drop-off line, identify them as a preschooler, and take care of them in that regard. So right now, no preschool transportation. It's going to move here to academic section, and as we're going over these areas of the plan, you know, if you're taking some notes, we designed this as an opportunity for some question and answer to occur, where we can provide clarity, or maybe some questions of things that maybe we've not thought of at this point. So please take some notes as we go along. If you have questions upon the conclusion of this discussion, we definitely want to hear your questions. So this is a lot to take in. First and foremost, this, you know, probably a 20-page document kind of covering the reentry to school. And my greatest concern as a school leader is trying to educate the board, the administration, the community, students, parents into a routine that none of us have a whole lot of prior knowledge to. This is going to be new for all of us, and just teaching everyone these expectations will literally take us weeks, is what we have thought of as an administrative team. Dana, do you have a question? Okay. So in the area of academics, this has been an area, you know, we had teachers on campus the last 2 or 3 weeks. We did have teachers here 3 days last week, specifically trying to look at how we devise an opportunity for education to really 3 different audiences. As we see it as educators, there's going to be a group of students that are going to come every day and consistently attend, and we look forward to those interactions. There's going to be a group of students inherently. We've already had a team that had to self-quarantine for 14 days. They're doing very well. There hasn't been any additional test positives, but per the ADH guidelines, if we have a test positive in our school, then we're required to contact trace, and any individual that has been in close proximity with that individual for 15 minutes in a 24-hour period of time, that's cumulative minutes, then that individual potentially would be self-quarantined for 14 days to see if they develop any symptoms. So the second audience, even though that there may be some people here that are planning to attend every day and try to strive for perfect attendance, they could be 2 weeks into school, be in proximity to a test positive, and have to self-quarantine for 14 days, and then they would be having to learn remotely for the next 14 days, and upon the conclusion of that, they come back to school. So that's kind of a second audience that our staff has to prepare for. That is what the department is called, is our ability to pivot and provide education on-site or remotely based on a phone call. And that's quite frankly what we're being challenged to do. The third audience that we're attempting to serve is a group of students that really want to try to learn virtually. And for those listening and those in attendance, it will fundamentally look different than last spring. Last spring, everything was about remediation. We were in a quite, the country was in great uncertainty. We're in a different place upon our reentry now, and so we're going to teach new content, 4 grades on a daily basis. And so if you learn virtually, you're going to have things come due every week, and if you don't get them done, you're not going to receive a very good grade for it. And so we've got to get that message out there, because virtual learning will look completely different than it did last spring as far as the expectation. So we have those 3 audiences. The intent of our plan, as you can see, we've kind of left this educational planning open until midnight on August the 5th. We'd like to hear from all parents that want to submit where they're at currently. If someone is submitted and they are listening and now they hear more information, they want to change their mind, we are more than willing to serve individuals up until the first day of school, but we're using this as a tool to figure out how many individuals are on and off campus. Mr. Campbell, can you highlight, did you link that survey in to where we can see the responses, or do you just want me to communicate them? Okay, so you have them, yeah, there you go. Kind of scroll down within the survey. We have roughly, as far as the educational option, about 26% of the population is, at this point in time, decided they're going to go 100% of the time virtual. We have roughly 87% of the population that is comfortable with their child wearing a face covering when they cannot social distance. A couple other things that come out of the survey so far is we roughly have about half the population that's planning to be on our campus every day, dropping off kids and picking them up. So 51% plus are going to be car riders in the morning and the afternoon. That's going to create some logistics on our campus, and that's why we really want to have our parents that are involved with high school or elementary drop-off to come in down by the administration building and begin to stack onto the campus so that we do not block the highway. The other element is we do pick up a certain percentage, I think it's 13%, of the individuals will need a bus ride home, but plan to have a car ride in the morning. So that gives us a little bit of an idea. One of the things that our staff does an outstanding job. If things change, plans change, you may want to be a car rider and you lose your ride, so we know that we may be picking up kids that said that they're going to be car riders initially. This just gives us an idea as to traffic volumes and kind of a starting point in the element of surveying. The other piece there that there's some additional data, but it does say that about 85% of our population has some element of connectivity. There was roughly 834 individuals that responded to this survey at the time, but of that 87%, I did see over 112 responses where they were relying on a cell phone connection to be their connectivity. So if you have multiple individuals in a household trying to connect to a cell phone or a hotspot, it can be very difficult to engage in, especially a Zoom call, where you're actually doing a live video conference call. The amount of data and bandwidth that requires is different than a telephone conversation. So our staff will be challenged with using the telephone to help communicate, potentially periodic conference type calling. It may be that we're checking in with virtual kids 1 to 2 times a week, because it may be unrealistic for us to have them. Our plan has to be where we provide asynchronous and synchronous opportunities for learning. All that means is that we got to provide an opportunity for students to learn off-site with no connectivity or connectivity. So they may or may not be learning in real time. And so in that challenge, we cannot, per where the department is at, have everybody Zoom in at 8 o'clock in the morning when we take roll. There's kids who may not have a connection that are a virtual connection. They're going to have to be responsible to do the work. We're going to try to work with them to communicate. And that's kind of what our teachers were doing last week, was devising, if you will, looking at digital resources to use in the classroom, but also be supplemental to learning outside of the classroom. And so the teacher will still be the core of the learning in the room. They will still do direct instruction like they always have, but there's going to be that balance of how we try to provide resources for individuals outside of the classroom. So our staff is challenged with trying to devise resources that whatever we do in the classroom, students outside the classroom would have access to. And that's kind of where we're at in that planning phase at this point in time. We've chosen Google Classroom as the method and the resource to share content. I would say that some students will do very well in this 100% online environment, and then other students will probably struggle a lot. To the degree that they may have to change either midstream or at quarter. You know, we're really encouraging people to try to make a decision and make your transitions at quarter versus 2 weeks into it, and then 2 weeks, you know, we need a certain commitment level, but the department has cautioned us this entire plan has to be provided to the state. And if it does not provide opportunities for synchronous and asynchronous learning, they're going to send it back to us and tell us to revise it. So we have to provide each of those options described to families throughout the community. And so I'm going to stop there and see if Mr. Campbell wants to fill in a little bit on the instructional side. I've been working closely with him in this, but he may have some things he wants to add. And I need a drink anyway.
All right. I did want to note to you that the kindergarten through 4th grade, we use a learning platform called Seesaw, which is different from the Google Classroom. It's a little friendlier for that age group, and so we'll have an example of that coming out to you through the building shortly. Linked in here a little later is a demonstration video of a Google Classroom from the student's perspective, so that you can look at that. And it's not one of our teachers at this point in time, but it is a teacher with a Google Classroom, and you can look in that and see kind of what the Google Classroom experience will be like. What Dr. Murphy said about being able to pivot, that is the key phrase from the State Department. And we have to be able to address students' needs on-site, off-site, on-site for 2 weeks, off-site for 2 weeks. We have to be prepared for a student not to be able to connect in some way. We have our Chromebooks, and the student, at the very least, if they do not have connectivity, we're asking that they come onto campus at a minimum of once a week, so that they can upload into their Google Classroom on their Chromebook the new content, and that at the same time will download what they've finished into our system so that we can grade those things. Another big difference that Dr. Murphy didn't mention, there won't be paper packets. So it's going to be a digital presentation that the virtual student or anyone who is in quarantine and off campus for a period of time will be completing. So we'll have devices for every student on campus, and we'll be prepared to send those home. At the lower grade levels, we'll issue those just as we always had, 7 through 12. If there is someone, I know we've had some new student registrations, and we never used to have to say we're a one-to-one campus, your kid will be issued a Chromebook, but we're in a different place now, and so some of those new students' parents didn't understand that we would provide the device. They didn't have to go out and buy one. So we do want to make sure that we're conscientiously communicating that to folks, that we are providing devices K through 12, and if the whole place shuts down and we have to go home, every kid will have a device. And so that's a key to this process as well. One of the things that we spent our federal CARES Act money that the federal government provided us was to purchase additional Chromebooks and iPads for the lower grades so that we would have devices to send home. Doctor?
Okay, the only other thing that, in the element, we may touch on it elsewhere, but I want to emphasize that along with the devices, we are trying to assist with additional connectivity. So we will have, and we're planning to use that on an as-needed check-in, check-out basis versus possibly just placing them into the home. We had budgeted for roughly 150 hotspots. That'll run about $6,000 a month. We're committed to that component. The governor releasing the money for additional hotspots. We got our information. We will get an additional 70 hotspots. So we will have connectivity in those two arenas. Plus, we are funding still yet through Resort Cable, and we'll probably continue to assist with that component of funding on an as-needed basis. A portion of this funding component, we don't know just exactly what's going to be the qualifying element for the distribution yet. I'm just sharing with you right now what we have available in addition to what the surveying has alluded to there. We will continue to provide an array of assessments being tests, along with the department required us to select and use a platform of assessments to compare back to a national norm, and so we're doing that through the NWEA program that we have used in the past. So that's really the areas of assessment. You know, our teachers have done a really good job of really trying to pair and identify essential learning standards. As a system, you constantly strive to review your results as it relates to ACT Aspire, your results as it relates to the composite on the ACT test. It kind of guides educators on how we are educating students across the board. And so with that, at times there's decisions rendered as to what students should know and be able to do based on those results. And so our district as a whole has always evaluated the data, looked at what we're teaching. Hopefully it's very tightly aligned to the outcomes that we're seeking with ACT Aspire and the ACT test. So with that, the curriculum that will be used, we will continue to use products that we currently have been using. Some of those products have come up with digital formats, whether that be in Eureka Math, utilizing a digital format of the current curriculum in the math offering, utilizing the reading, writing, and phonics. There's units of study there and some elements there that we've purchased that will also be digital. So we'll try to use as many tools as we can that we purchase that we think align to our curricular standards and our essential learning standards, and then our teachers are really looking at other resources to bring into that Google Classroom to further assist the learning. Probably our greatest concern is the remediation of a virtual student. How do you truly help someone trying to learn remotely with minimal to no connectivity? We know that realistically, there will be a shortfall there, especially with minimal connectivity. And so I think as we get into this, we will find out that there's going to have to be a place for some learning lab opportunities for some of those virtual students, whether that's discussion through phone or whether those parents are willing to come up and be a part of a small group exercise. This is a first, and so what we lay out there ultimately, we're going to take a ACT Aspire test this spring, and we want to prepare our students for the future. And we're trying to do that with some pretty significant barriers and constraints centered around the level of interaction that we can have with kids. So it's truly a challenge in that regard, but our intention is to provide a quality education for every child coming to our school. And so with that, not addressing any audience questions at this point, but we've kind of went through governance. We have talked a little bit about transportation. We've had a few questions along the way. We're at a point of academics. Is there any questions that any board members would have specifically before we move any further in the presentation?
I have some. You talked a lot about new content and expectations and synchronization and providing resources, but I'm not really sure that I have a lot of clarity on what a day would look like. Like, I want it just broken down. I'm a student, I'm showing up for school today, and I'd like to hear something from an elementary standpoint and then, you know, a middle school, high school student. And I know that's hard to do because this is new, but is every teacher going to determine how they teach their classroom? Are they all going to be held to the same standards as far as this is how we want you to do Eureka Math, this is how we want you to do the reading writing labs? You know, if it's a situation, for example, in elementary where it's time to read said book because the curriculum asks for you to read this, is it going to be, you know, a stranger reading the book to my child? Is it going to be a sheet that says have your mom read the book to you, you read the book to your mother? Just a lot of questions like that, like I said, that I know are probably very difficult to answer.
Sure.
But I think I've gotten a lot of questions from the community just saying, what does the day look like? And I don't know the answer.
Well, you know, our intention is to provide a guaranteed and viable curriculum to all students consistently on site. That'll be our number one objective. So to try to provide clarity of what on-site looks like, it's going to look relatively close to what it's always looked like, except we're taking any learning tools and we are, whether it's a sheet of paper, we have to provide, if it's truly something that benefits learning, we're going to have to PDF it and get it in there digitally so that the student who is working remotely, asynchronously, at least has access to the content. That student will not be provided the same degree of, as I said, in the element of remediation or enrichment in that regard virtually. They're going to be working a lot on their own. And so when you look at the type of things we listed back up here for a student that would be virtual, they're kind of a self-motivated, independent learner, computer literate, good time manager, effective communicator, has a personal commitment to their learning, is academically ready, not deficient, and has technologically prepared. So, you know, I don't know that 25% of our student population fit that bill inherently at this point, but that's where people are surveying out. As far as what we're going to deliver within that day, there's still going to be that simulation of a routine. We have, you know, there's going to be a time and day for the literacy block. There's going to be a time and day, you know, a portion of the day set aside for math. So that school day, once we get them into the homeroom teacher on an elementary level, they're going to conduct their classroom relatively similar to what they've done in the past. You know, some things that constrain us would be classroom libraries, how long you keep them. I think what we've decided is if you get 7 books to keep in your little basket, when you get done with them, instead of them going back in for selection, they have to go to the side for 5 days to to make sure that there's nothing on them. We spray them, and so then they go back into the rotation. So, but I would tell you that paper won't totally disappear, but anything that is inherently a part of the instructional process, we've got to replicate digitally. And that's kind of a challenge for our teachers, because we're going to have to think differently, because typically what we've done is we wanted them all to have a copy. We made enough copies and we handed them out. Now we're going to still potentially make enough copies to do that, but we're going to have to then also scan it and place it into the Google Classroom for the other individual to have access to. Students will still have a recess. Students will still go to lunch. It may be constrained as far as assigned seat. They're still going to have electives. Probably the only elective we don't know for sure how it will play out at this point, because we don't have the guidance, is band and choir. Whether we can actually get into a space. I mean, we may literally have choir practice in the auditorium just to get the 12-foot distancing. We may have to have band practice in here. They may have to rotate, and they only get to practice 2 days because they're sharing that space. But we're attempting to create, if they're in athletics at this point in time, we've been approved to have athletics. So the day, the constraints within the day will be centered around how we move, the mask, and it'll be reflective of, I think the concern would be, is my child going to be safe? And so we use the mask as a tool in that process, but to think about the educational day for a student, that's kind of reflective of the elementary level. The middle school and the high school currently have the schedules that they had last spring. We've evaluated those schedules. At this point in time, we intend to offer those classes as, depending on the number of students that may stay virtual, we may reduce some sections of classes, because if we can reduce some sections and allow for some of our teachers to have more time to work with students who are virtual, that benefits everyone in the process. So in the middle school setting, the day will start beyond the car rider line or wherever they get off at school. We plan to probably send them to homeroom initially. So everybody's day will probably end up starting at location A, where it used to be on the turf. Turf's not an option. We can't have that number of people on, in the middle school setting. They used to go outside there. We've looked at moving some of them into the gymnasium bleachers until we get the day started, but it looks like when kids get to school, they'll go to their first period teacher. And then once they get to their first period teacher, we begin to structure the day so they'll still have whatever that learning block is of time. And in that middle school setting, it could be a combined communicate literacy type block with social studies, and then they do a social studies or science and a math. That part of the schedule is still a part. We think about our day and our kids being involved in project-based learning in the afternoon. We don't know for sure how we're going to be able to use manipulatives and art, because there's still some constraints on, if you use that pencil, that's your pencil, I've got to have my pencil, so it's unrealistic on the amount of supplies that we're going to have, and then how we disinfect those supplies. So it's not going to be a mirror of a current day from last fall or a year ago, but that, I hope, gives you at least a little bit of insight as to the discussions that we've been having. I think the bigger question that we will have to answer will be based on how our teachers balance what we're trying to do, because that's a totally different side of the process than the student experiencing it. It's the teacher balancing basically those potential three groups of students.
Have you guys, is there any talk about how the hallways will work? Are they going one-sided, or everybody just fend for yourself, or how's that going to work?
We've looked at variations in terms of staggered dismissals. The problem you run into is individuals going to the next location, waiting outside. There is some serious thought around movement in certain directions only. Our campus is a little bit constrained, but there, you know, definitely we've always used etiquette on either side of the hallway for movement. Yeah, so I mean, it's, and we've done a pretty good job in that context of kids and, you know, being able to move around just because of the volume of students that we have. Some of our hallways are smaller in width than others, and I think it'll vary depending on building and location of which hallways.
Last question, I promise.
Sure, no, that's all right.
I'm just going to be honest. I'm super concerned about, you know, we talk about every student every day, and I'm really concerned about the 25% staying home. I understand that the list was given on there of being self-starters and motivators and all that, and that's great, and I agree with that, but they're not staying home by choice. I mean, it is a choice, let's be real, but they're staying home because, you know, they don't want to get their grandparents sick, their aunt, their uncle, somebody that has a medical condition. So I'm extremely concerned about what's going to happen to those kids. I really am. And I don't know the fix.
What's that?
I don't know the fix. I mean, I don't know how to remedy that. But I see that as a big problem. I'm not sure that I see a clear picture of how they're going to learn at the same level as the children here. And we said that really that's not a possibility.
Well, I don't disagree with your statement. You know, if we could take the hills, hollers, and valleys and take those hot spots and place them in locations where there is no connectivity and create connectivity in 2 weeks, that would alleviate a portion of my concern. I think the inequity of connectivity will probably be a greater demise to the learning model than the content itself. Yes, there could be true struggles in learning online, depending on the content level. That's inherently hard enough, but if someone is in that situation you described and they choose safety over education, there's probably going to be a shortfall in our mission statement at that point of supporting every student every day equivalently. Mr. Campbell, is there anything you'd want to add to that?
Just, you mentioned on the schedule being the same as last year, and at the middle school and high school, we have matched up they don't have bells, but we have matched up their class change times so that we're able to utilize the staff more efficiently. So we can share some folks, we can cross over between buildings more effectively, and so that athletics are all at the same time. In the past, we've had 8th grade going to the same class that 9th grade goes to, but they go in 10-minute spans between each other, so you have a very limited overlap. We've also moved the junior high athletic period to the first period of the day, as opposed to in the afternoon after lunch. So that changes up a little bit of the structure at the middle school at the start of the day. And so that is a change that we've done since we left here in March.
Dr. Murphy, I understand asynchronous where, you know, the students will have uploaded material and they can view it at any time. Can you help me understand the synchronous part? Are students going to have the opportunity to log on in real time and see their classmates and what's going on there? I mean, can they participate that way if they're at home?
Depending on the connectivity and the structure, we've got several teachers talking about document cameras, different things to capture that moment. So it would not be a requirement. It would probably be highly encouraged. But when we start down that path, I think we can do it, but we just have to be very mindful that you may have a group of 7 students on a hangout. As long as the teacher has a laptop, if they're in the classroom, should not be an issue at all. We should be able to bring, you know, everyone in this room in some context, probably since COVID began, has set in on something virtual in some regard. And so the school can definitely do it. The platform can support it. And so it would be encouraged, but we can't require it, because then that's the asynchronous component. Because when you do require it and they don't have connectivity, then you're penalizing that student, further expanding the inequity.
But for some, they might want to do it that way to feel more a part of the classroom setting, you know, from home. So
And I think if I ask any of those three administrators that if we were unwilling to allow a student to remote into a classroom, that's something that they would work through the process to try to overcome any barriers as to why a teacher wouldn't find that to be beneficial. I find that would be that would give them the best opportunity for learning from a remote perspective. Now, I'm sitting here speaking to you today when we haven't truly tried that, but I think that's something that we definitely want to consider doing. We just can't design it as a component of requirement, but it's going to be highly encouraged. Kind of like the second grader, we're going to highly encourage them to wear a mask, just like that virtual student. We would highly encourage you to be a part of this class virtually in real time. That definitely would be the best opportunity. It would beat getting it 3 days later, because if they don't have connectivity and they have to come up here, they may not get the content for 2 to 3 days. And we are looking at weekly assignment turn-ins. So if they are virtual, you know, if they don't turn in content on time, there's going to be pretty significant consequences to not turning it in on time.
So in regards to accountability for those virtual students, there's not going to be a requirement that they log in every day?
That they log in every day?
Or that...
No, it's unrealistic to ask them to log in every day, because the parent may not have access to transportation. That's where we're at currently, correct, Steve?
We got over 200 hotspots, right? As of now, we had 150. We got another
150 and another 70, yes. So we have
So-
over 200.
My whole thing is there's no accountability for those virtual kids. You're going to have kids doing homework and stuff at 10 o'clock, midnight, do it all in one day. I just don't see my kids personally. There ain't no way they could do it. I mean, I'll just be honest. That'd be crazy for me to even think of it. But all these other schools are doing where you log in. If you don't log in, you're late. You're counted absent. How are they making it?
I don't know that it's all of the other schools, and those schools have not turned in their plan to the State Department yet.
I mean, you can get on their websites and read it.
I understand.
But why would you not want to have that accountability? I mean, are we saying that the state's going to say that you can't make it mandatory to log in every day?
Well, that's what we've been reading since the inception, or we would have already done it. And I know that Lakeside required their students to log in the spring. They did it for about 2 weeks and quit, because they run into inherently even the conditions of the login, and does the login facilitate participation points? I mean, at the end of the day, are we going to devise, you know, there's an element of accountability that's centered around what a student should know and be able to do, and the question is, if they can prove to you and perform the work. I have a greater concern that we don't have all the checks and balances to monitor plagiarism than I do whether they can Zoom in every day, to be honest with you. And in that context, you know, depending on the age level of the student, when they choose to do the work, as long as the work is done, that's what we're seeking. You know, and I get that some districts are going down this path, and it is directly in, I mean, we're just following what the department guidelines are. And we really come out, if you remember initially, when you wanted to choose virtual, you need to choose for a semester. And it took about 3 days, And then that ship sailed because we got a communication from the department that said, no, parents are not going to know what's their best option and have to choose by semester. Because we have inherently what Cindy was describing, people who are going to be staying at home that may or may not have connectivity, and it's totally beyond the child's control. So, you know, the question will be, can we devise quality assessments that determines the learning outcome? And if we do that, then as a board, as a entity, if the student can perform the work and do it well, isn't that what we're seeking as the outcome? But if we are seeking, you know, teaching responsibility based on punctual attendance, I get exactly what you're saying, but it doesn't align with lack of connectivity during a pandemic. Mr. Campbell, you want to take a stab at this?
Well, just to add a little bit there, the firm deadlines will be the accountability piece, Mr. George, in that they have to have the work turned in. And I get it, they may do it all in one day and turn it in. And if you think about your own kids or you think about your own school experience, you know, we would give out progress reports at 4.5 weeks, and just before those progress reports went out, or just after those progress reports went out, the students will come clamoring to the teachers wanting to know what they can do to get their grade up. And so rather than hold their feet to the fire and say, no, you've earned what you've earned, we accept late work right up until right up until the midnight on the last day, the last minute of the last hour of the last day, we would accept work. And and that's face to face. So firm deadlines are what we see to be our accountability piece there.
And I know some of these schools have just a teacher specific for virtual kids. I was talking to a guy at work today. He's at another school district away from here, but they have one teacher that does all the virtual kids for that grade level.
You know, we mulled that around until the state laid out there that, you know, if we have to close down, then everyone becomes a virtual student. Okay? So our perspective was that we wanted our students to be taught by our teachers, to be taught the content that we believe they need to learn. And if we go to off-site, we want all of our teachers to be proficient at being off-site remote teachers, and figured the best way to get there would be for all of them to have virtual students from the beginning. So it's philosophical. That was our approach to it. I know, you know, we listened to a webinar with some folks from Fort Smith and some other schools, and Fort Smith is giving 51% of their students away. 51% of their students are choosing to be virtual. They're assigning them to virtual teachers who don't work for the Fort Smith School District, and those students will be taught by a virtual teacher. And I know that's not what you were talking about, but that thought was what kept us from going down that line. We don't want to give our kids away. We want our kids to be taught by our teachers, and so that's where we are on that.
I would just echo that that concept has not been written off to where we might have specific teachers trying to teach virtual students. I think at the end of the day, it's going to require a slightly higher percentage than 25%, because 25% could be 30 or it could be 15 when it's all said and done. And so that's going to put the lion's share of our students on site for instruction, and we won't be able to diversify our staffing model well enough to only teach 6 students virtual in a specific grade and maybe 15 students virtually in another grade. So, but I would tell you that we're going to continue to monitor that very closely. This will be something that we'll make adjustments based on what is not working at all. Every concern being stated here is truly a valid concern. I'm sure there's people in the audience that have the very same concerns. So, you know, it's the work we're entering into will be a work in progress as we begin to initiate it. And I think when we get into the work, we're going to learn some things very quickly that did work well and did not work at all.
Dr.
And
Murphy.
I think we have to be prepared to make modifications to best serve the student population in that context.
Can we talk a little bit about the professional development for teachers on this?
So in the context of the professional development, the resources that they are using is paired up with the Google Classroom. That's the area where we felt like they had the greatest degree of understanding versus an LMS that's foreign to them. We do have additional professional development centered around, I think, Seesaw that is planned, additional PD that'll be coming back, Mr. Campbell, when we get teachers back in, you know, but there's only so much professional development versus pairing, because a lot of the teachers are wanting to design their content, so a lot of it is vetting quality content. We've looked at CK12 as a resource, Springdale's curriculum as a resource that was released publicly, along with, I just gave the team another resource today that kind of merges all that open source content together. I would tell you that if we selected a specific learning management system, all that does is deliver the content, it doesn't teach it. You need to be aware, the other element that may be out there, Corey, that you're hearing is the Lincoln Learning System is a K through 12 digital system that the state is paying for that could be used to deliver the content with our teacher. And so that is available to our teachers this year. If we can overcome, as Mr. Little's asking regarding professional development, if we can rise to the occasion, our intention would be to strengthen our own curriculum to use long-term, because we see that there's probably going to be a segment of the population that wants this as a choice moving forward, at least from a resource perspective. So trying to build that content locally, we feel betters our system long-term. It's probably more work on the front end, but we are watching very closely whether we may have to, I'll give you an example. If you're a secondary teacher and you have 3 preps, it may be unrealistic for you to pull digital content in through 3 preps. That's 3 different classes that you're planning for throughout the day. So could we use Lincoln Learning to lay out the curriculum that's going to be delivered, because here again, the curriculum has to be digital in nature to address the 3 target audiences, the on-site, the group that may have to stay home for 14 days, and the virtual audience. So those are just a few things that we are continuing to review. And, you know, as much as I would want to say that I've had the level of input that we're seeking, we've had all teachers back for 3 days. They're kind of self-reflecting that experience. We've had roughly maybe 12 to 13 teachers in all of our committee work. And so we're trying to build out a plan with pretty limited input. And so until our staff gets back here full-time under contract, we're going to really, you know, we've got to use when they're here to continue to build out this plan. And so this plan will continue to evolve from an academic perspective. I don't think that it is polished by no means. Any other questions from the board? Okay, let's continue here, see where we're at, Mr. Campbell. So we're down now to the student service section, which is an area that we've had a lot of different strategies deployed. This is another area where we're very concerned about the quality of individualization of instruction that will occur depending on whether the student chooses, where the family chooses on-site versus off-site or remote instruction. And so there's been a lot of work centered around how will we deliver, whether it's indirect, co-teach. You can kind of see in the context of the delivery, speech therapy, whether it's going to be self-contained, whether we have made decisions to actually make site visits periodically to assist some of those students. I think all of those areas are possibilities. There has been an evolving of some digital resources to kind of help in that context. I know that there was a lot of, believe it or not, some of these therapies were being conducted virtually, even this summer. So these services need to continue to be provided. You can kind of see how we're laying out not only for 504s, but dyslexia intervention, along with the academic intervention. So as you look at the supporting components here, I'm going to kind of let Mr. Campbell, he's kind of worked a little closer with them. Is there any specifics that you would want to provide or provide some examples for anyone listening in or anyone in the audience regarding the individual education plan and how we attempt to deliver that based on these constraints?
We are concerned as we go over the folks who have responded already. We have a number of our special education students who are choosing to remain at home. And so when you talk about providing curriculum modifications on-site and then curriculum modifications off-site, that is going to be a significant challenge. We'll work through it. We'll, Ms. Mushrush and her team will network and find the ways to do that. You know, additionally, right now, if a classroom teacher can't social distance, and with the classroom teacher, it's 12 feet, okay? So a speech therapist who's working with a kid's mouth isn't going to be 12 feet away from her student. The student won't be able to have a mask on. It will be a significant challenge. Our OT and PT folks, hands-on folks, our special education paraprofessionals who provide self-care for students. There are all sorts of constraints that just really model for us how different our new normal is from our old normal. Fortunately, two actions that this board has taken. One, hiring the in-house mental health professional is a significant piece, and you know, we hired her just before school closed, and she began to do teletherapy almost immediately with the folks that we had identified who needed to be seen. And then the hiring of a police chief of our own are two steps that you all have taken to address the needs of our students. And that's what this whole plan boils down to, is how are we going to address the needs of every student, and every student every day, and it's every individual student. So what works for one kid at home may not work for another kid at home. And we'll have to figure out what's going to work for each of those students. And so that's part of that challenge, that we can't sit here tonight and say in 3 weeks it's going to look like this here, and it's going to look like this if you're at home, because we just don't know. And I wish we did. Honestly, I wish we weren't having any of these conversations. I wish we were thinking about purple and gold game, midnight madness, and Mr. Combs wasn't here because he was up on the field marching his kids. All of those things would be wonderful if they still existed, but that was the old world. And we're now in a new world. And so even our definition of fair and equal and accountability, all of those definitions become new definitions in our new world. And so that's what we're faced with. And I know folks want to know what's it going to look like when they drop their kid off. Well, right now we can tell you that they're going to go to a class. If they're 5th through 12th grade, they can go get breakfast and then go to a class. They're not going to go play. They're not going to cluster. They're not going to hang out in the parking lot. We know at lunch they're going to have an assigned seat. And then we don't know what they'll do after they finish eating. It could be that they have to sit in that assigned seat. It could be that one grade level a day gets to go outside at 5 through 12. K4, they'll get a recess at some point in time. What K5 will look, or 512 will look like, it's hard to say because we don't know how many bodies we'll have on campus and how far we can spread those bodies apart. So that's a hard thing. And I know that that's not how the kids will get out of school at the end of the day. Okay, right now the bell rings, it's 3:30, and everybody just boom. No, that won't happen. That was the old world. New world, it's going to look totally different. Will we dismiss by grade levels? Will we begin dismissing at 2:15? It's possible that some kids will be finished with school at 2:15. Some kids won't be finished with school until 3:30. But to space the kids out, to get the kids off campus, to keep the kids socially distanced, to keep the kids safe, because that's the bottom line in all of this, is how are we going to keep our kids safe? Whether you believe in the virus or you don't believe in the virus, whether you believe in masks, whether you don't believe in masks, ultimately we have to do these things based on the guidance of the state to keep kids safe. Doesn't matter what I believe. I just have to follow the guidance.
When you talk about the face mask and stuff, can they still wear just the shields?
Teachers, no, that doesn't count.
It doesn't count.
Nope. We thought it would, state said no. We have this guidance, and it's called guidance, but it's really rules. They just don't get real specific until you come up with a plan, and then they say, no, that doesn't meet our guidance.
And not to be facetious, but the rules, there's a pretty big eraser that's used in the development of the rules because the number of cases and what they're learning is, you know, they're making decisions in real time, and therefore the rules are, our guidance is shifting a little bit. We were very optimistic that our staff wearing the face shield would strengthen the instructional model. We were actually excited that that would be at least a way for our students to engage with our teachers. You've had a conversation, you know, if we weren't socially distanced and we tried to communicate, I couldn't determine whether you were excited, upset. When you're wearing a mask, it's very difficult to read emotion. And a part of teaching is relationships and emotion and engagement, and all of those things require a teachable moment, and you react to that teachable moment based on what's occurring with that individual child at that time. And if you don't react at the right time in the right way, you miss a moment to engage them in learning. And so the face covering itself, if they wear a shield, they'll wear a mask and a shield. And some employees may choose to do that. It's kind of, I showed you those two in the month of June. And I told you at that time that, you know, the shield potentially was an option. By the time we got to July, we'd ordered 250 of them, and it's no longer an option.
Mr.
But
Campbell,
we do have them on hand.
on the IEP, a lot of the students have health issues and they're going to elect to stay home. But how are we going to be able to fulfill those minutes of the IEP? Are we going to have to modify the IEP?
Yes, sir, that'll be a part of it. Some of it, if they have connectivity, we can still provide services and provide their minutes as they're laid out in the IEP. But if there's not connectivity, we'll have to have an SPC and rewrite that IEP to reflect what we can actually provide.
Any other questions here? Great dialogue, great questions. Looking forward to further questions here when we get to the community portion of questions. I'm going to kind of shift us now to communication. This is an element that we are, once we devise kind of where the plan lies, what the routines look like, how do we devise methods that are effective for communication. The tools that we have available, of course, is the website. Probably the newest thing that we would encourage anyone here to download is we have kind of an interactive app to where if you want to get some messaging without participating in a social media platform, you can use our school app without having to go to like Facebook to access content. It's just another tool for communicating, so we would encourage you to download the Fountain Lake School app. It's in iTunes or in Google Play. It's just Fountain Lake School. And so it will give you the ability to access our live feed, calendar events. It'll give you an overlay to where you could actually put some of those events onto your own calendar. And then we're planning to put the locations in there, and so we're really trying to help parents use a mobile approach to versus having to go on a computer and go back to the website. And so other tools that we'll still have is the notification system. I sent that notification out on the educational intent planning and was able to push that out either via text, voicemail, Twitter, Facebook, the live feed, and we doubled our participation rate in about a week. So we were running just over 400 surveys at that point in time, and in another week we've now gotten to roughly 835 surveys is where we're at today, and hopefully before the deadline we'll exceed 1,000. We do serve on a normal year roughly almost 1,400 students. So we have an audience out there that has not responded yet. And so we do want them to respond in some fashion to us. The other thing that we're trying to do is clean up our data. In that survey, we asked for what's your favorite communication tool as far as email. Give us an email. Give us your phone number that you want to be what's that current number so that we can clean our data up on our end to communicate effectively with parents in that regard. We plan to provide just some very, that 2 or 3 minute video. I did a Rotary presentation. It ended up being roughly 50 minutes long and so I didn't put that out there in my own words because most people won't set in for that 45, 50 minute, but I'm sure we've lost some listeners here this evening based on our time frame, but we want to devise some very short videos that maybe talk about coming onto the campus for drop-off, pickup, others related to maybe kind of your question, Cindy, what's a school day look like? We've seen some pretty good little videos that kind of walk through and talk about, kind of give a general understanding back to parents on that decision-making process. And I know inherently, before you check the box, you really want to know we're providing you the best that we have to give you in terms of what we know that it's going to look like based on where we're at tonight. So those are some of the tools, I think, in the area. We want to spend some time in terms of helping parents. Quite frankly, we've talked an awful lot about students, but there's a lot of parents that we say very loosely Google Classroom, but their ability to connect into it or maybe figure out how to sign up to get emails on what assignments my child hasn't completed yet, just the simplicity of that task, parents may not know how to do that. And so that might be something that could really help parents to have a better understanding of what their child is expected to do. Because we do feel like if they'll check that email, it kind of gives them kind of a mirror of what the student is expected to do, and at least gives a parent a chance to ask them if they've done it. So that's an element of a tool for communications that we feel that will be beneficial. In that regard, we are looking possibly at maybe entertaining a grade level at a time, and maybe do a virtual open house, just so we can continue to share information. We don't know if we're going to go that route where we allow people in, or whether we push it out totally virtual, but having some opportunities to control people coming onto the campus, into our auditorium, with appropriate social distancing. We could possibly get a grade level into this space. If you've noticed, we've kind of had to block off every other row, so it really minimizes the capacity in our facilities in that regard. Could we use the gymnasium and social distance in the gymnasium to have a grade level or two? So we're really thinking about different ways to communicate with parents, but we know that the timing of the communication and the clarity of the plan are the two details we have to have. So timing being getting a little bit closer to the opening of school. Since the governor's pushed it back, it's the 24th. We haven't mentioned that, but it is the 24th on a Monday, will be our first day of classes. And so we roughly have about 3 weeks here to facilitate additional communication in the element of planning. We've mentioned the broadband elements as far as technology is concerned, and kind of covered devices. I think inherently, connectivity is a concern, but even in having the additional hotspots, there's some locations in our district, when we've looked at our district geographical map, there is no connectivity. There are dark zones within our district that have no connection. And there may be somebody here that can attest to that, but I know there's locations where it wouldn't matter whether it's AT&T, T-Mobile, or what it was, you would not be able to access a connection point. So we know that broadband access is critical, but in some instances cannot be delivered based on geography. The other area in health and safety, I mentioned earlier we had a test positive. The school district will be required to have a point of contact that works directly with the Arkansas Department of Health. Until I designate that to another individual, I will remain as the point of contact for the health department. And so if we get a call that comes into our district of a student that is tested positive, the role of the school district will be to evaluate when that student tested positive. You contact the Arkansas Department of Health, and then when you visit with that student, you have to first determine when they were symptomatic. We mentioned earlier tonight a lot of conversations around seating charts. Mr. Campbell was alluding to what that school day may look like. In the event that we have a test positive, we have to retrace the steps of that individual, sometimes 24 hours and sometimes a total of 3 days. And so whatever the routine of that individual student is who tests positive, we've got to go back and kind of follow where they've been, with the understanding what we're looking for is other children that have spent at least 15 minutes in close proximity. That's inside the relationship that Cindy and I have had here tonight. We could both be wearing a face covering the entire time, and it does not matter. But if there's 15 minutes of time that we've found that interaction accumulates to a 24-hour period of time, then if I'm the test positive and that is determined that Cindy was a probable close contact, then the school will notify Cindy that she will have to self-quarantine for a total of 14 days. And so depending on the number of individuals that are in close proximity with that student will determine the number of students that may have to self-quarantine that may not even have a symptom, may not be ill, may not have any concerns whatsoever, and we may get a call from a parent that says, hey, how come my kid has to stay home? And we communicate, of course, first and foremost to that parent that your child has been a probable close contact. You're going to have to make arrangements for them to remain at home for 14 days. And so with that, then we create a list of the number of students, and we start with the test positive. We have all the probable close contacts listed. We state the student name, the parent name, and a parent contact phone number, because we've already reached out to the parent, notifying them of the 14-day quarantine. And then the health department will do a follow-up call, and they will check in to see if anyone has become symptomatic, if they understand what the self-quarantine actually means. And so that's kind of the process that would occur. Many schools in this context cannot, they're taking different strategies for communication to protect the privacy of the individual and to protect the confidence of the community. So kind of where most schools are falling out is they're at least stating that they've had an employee that's tested positive, or they've had a student that's tested positive. The reason we went to that next layer in the athletic area, that following day, we had set up free physicals for all athletes. And we knew if we put out that an athlete had tested positive, that the whole physical would be done. So we went ahead and put out that we had a volleyball team member that had tested positive. And so we went to a little bit lower level. Ultimately, I think there was a self-disclosure among that parent. That's totally up to the individual family and the parent, but from the school's perspective, and this is a very important piece, the school will not be at liberty to disclose the individual child's name of who is a test positive in our school, because as a parent, it'd be real easy if you say, well, were you around little Johnny? And if so, we're going to take some precautions. And so unless we contact you, that means to the best of our knowledge, your child was not a probable close contact to that child that tested positive. And so in that communication that I sent out, if we have not notified you, that means your child was not in a situation that was compromising their health and well-being, and they could go on about their normal routine and their normal day. And so that's really what I would share with you, that is it's going to be a daunting task if we have a third grader who rides the school bus to school. He gets off his school bus and proceeds to go to class and then goes through his day, but we have to work with teachers to go back through at least a 72-hour period of retracing the steps of that individual. And so that might be one day he had art, the next day he may have had a different class, and then, oh, by the way, maybe it's a sixth grader. And now the sixth grader is in the car rider line. And so you have to retrace those steps, and then you may have an eighth grader that rides to school with his brother every day and actually is involved in athletics. And so now you're retracing the steps of an eighth grader within the school day. And so was he a participant, and who was he around over the last 3 practices? And you can see very quickly how investigating and identifying an individual in close proximity inside of 6 feet, if both of us are wearing a mask for 15 minutes in a 24-hour window of time, is going to be extremely challenging for the public school to disseminate and monitor and investigate that process. And then the Arkansas Department of Health, and this is not just a Fountain Lake thing, this is every school across the state of Arkansas. This is the method of how we are going to monitor this process. And what I would say is, for the safety and well-being of the staff, students, and the Fountain Lake community, if we have a community member who tests positive, we need for them to disclose to the school, because the Arkansas Department of Health will handle anything in the community, but inherently may or may not notify the school of a test positive. So we will need some self-reporting in that behalf, and we're working diligently as leaders to try to get that cleared up, because what we don't want is a parent who tests positive and their child should be self-quarantining and they're coming to school and we're unaware of it. And so that gives you an example of both sides of what we control within the school and what the Arkansas Department of Health will control outside of the school setting. And I don't want to belabor that, but we define what's a probable close contact. The Arkansas Department of Health defines a close contact. So with that, Mr. Campbell, have I run out of time? I know you want to tell me more about how much time I've run out of, but I'm going to, at this time, I want to turn it one more opportunity over for the board to ask any additional questions, and then we're going to turn it over to community members who may have a question. And if we can't address your question tonight, we'll try to get it into a frequently asked questions section and try to respond back to you following this meeting. But anything else from the board?
So what are we looking like per class? How many kids per class for, say, elementary, middle school, and high school? Will they be able to social distance in the class, take the mask off? How's that looking?
I would tell you, you want to answer that?
I will. At the elementary, we're probably going to average between 15 and 18 students per class. And you've been in our classrooms, and even if we pull out all of the extras, you're going to be hard pressed to social distance in the classroom. Possible, but it's probably not probable.
Okay, so on the elementary, why don't we outfit all them classrooms with the plexiglass thing? Is that feasible? Because they're not where, I mean, I just think
Right.
a lot of parents are thinking, well, or teachers
Yep.
are thinking, my kids K through 4 or 3 don't have any mask on,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or they can, I guess they could opt to if they wanted to,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just not,
Right.
a kindergartner's not going to
Right.
keep it on all
So it
day.
would have to be a desktop, because the sheriff or the fire marshal said hanging, finding plexiglass, one thing. But, so clear shower curtains are not an option because they're a fire hazard. So we can't hang clear shower curtains from the ceiling. That was something one of those things you see on social media that people do, and that's not an option because it's a fire hazard. It's possible. We've ordered some. We've looked at some. I know one of the ones that we've got in is very, very small. If you were going to cluster your kids together in the old four desk seating, the sample one that we've gotten in is really small to where I don't know how much protection it would provide. So it's not something that's off the table, but it's not something that we have on hand right now. And part of that is because of availability.
And the other thing, when we looked at the purchasing of that, it does not replace a face covering. In the recommendations and the guidelines, the best approach is a face covering, not a shield between, because you still have to wear the covering in that regard.
But not K through 3.
At this point in time, we don't think it's, and we can change that. There's 2 districts in the county that are K through 12 face coverings. We just are trying to, in our mind, process, and Bismarck and Hot Springs. I mean, we're seeing this turn out on either side. Last time I talked to Melissa's, they were contemplating, they didn't feel like that kindergartners could wear it effectively. And so making it a requirement versus highly recommending it, can we fall out with a highly recommendation and provide those 4 students in the classroom, and could we get 75–80% of them wearing them without requiring it? We think we can get there with parent education, but it's still us social distancing in every classroom. That's why I mentioned the flexibility of getting outside periodically, or maybe it's staging. You follow a kid and 2 of his classes within the day have that opportunity, because it may be that we have to kind of rotate around. The other option that we do have is to continue to close large space facilities during the day and make them instructional spaces. And at this point in time, we haven't taken that next step. Dividers right now, as you can imagine, are extremely hard to get your hands on, whether they're curtain oriented, you know, just where you're creating visible barriers or whether you're trying to do auditory barriers. An example of that would be, could you get some social distancing if you put 3 to 4 classes in the backside of the gymnasium and no longer use that for PE? Then you could possibly have opportunities for social distancing that do not exist in some classrooms, 750 to 800 square foot space in the K2 or the 2 through 4 building is our smallest square footage classrooms in the district. But that's a great question. But that's what I would tell you at this point is, unfortunately, we're going to be wearing a face covering with a pretty high degree of frequency during the day.
What about, like high school lunches we don't have an open campus like for lunches, right? Is that even feasible to help out with getting less kids in the lunchroom?
So the question would be, do we open the campus back up? You would have fewer students in the lunchroom, but you would have any people that are leaving campus congregating at Sonic, all of that. If you have to self-quarantine, more than likely any test positive that comes out of a group that leaves campus, you're probably going to have to self-quarantine the whole bunch. And so because you're not controlling the environment enough to know where they're going, I just don't know the degree of disruption. We feel like at lunch we have enough space with the PE building to socially distance and allow them to eat. That's why, you know, we did kind of kick that around, and we felt like using that other facility for that would be a better use of that space. And then that PE class, I think, is going to Safe Room A. Step up there and go ahead and ask a question, or somebody else can just take turns.
All right, so the governor's mandate is 10 years old for a mask, right? So what about kids under 10? Are they going to be required to wear masks at school?
Our plan currently does not require them to wear a mask if they're under the age of 10.
So they can come to school, not have to wear a mask all day. Will they be required to social distance during recess, lunch, etc.?
The social distancing, we're going to try to coordinate them into pods for play at recess. What we've seen most schools do is they take them and allow for a group of students to play in a certain designated area. Realistically, without what we would have to do is try to do everything we could to encourage our students to wear a face covering, and then place them in proximity within the classroom based on who's going to wear a face covering every day.
Kids over 10?
Kids over 10?
Face mask all day?
Yes.
Recess, lunch, split
Anytime.
recess?
It's kind of like us in here. Once you can social distance, you can remove it. Our biggest challenge is going to be just quite frankly hanging on to a mask.
Right.
The logistics of them not losing it is, we've talked to others in that regard, but to address your question specifically, right now the design is for any individual in 10 years of age and up. They need to either come to school with a face covering with a plan to use it, and if they're not using it, then we'll have to take whatever corrective action we need to, give them another mask, talk to them, a warning. Ultimately, if they choose not to wear it, then they can't attend.
Okay.
And one follow-up to that, Dr. Murphy. Correct me if I'm wrong. Children under 10, if they ride the bus, will have to wear a mask on the bus.
All children on the school bus, K through 12, have to wear a mask.
On the bus.
And what kind of masks? Do y'all have a specific masks?
Any type of face covering that they want to provide, we're leaving at the discretion of the parents, so it's not going to have to be COVID-19 approved. We're going to be providing, like those masks that were out there in the entry area. I think we have currently about 6,000 of those in stock that we'll be distributing as students need them.
All right.
I'm going to interrupt you real quick. Y'all are saying
We have 10-year-olds in 4th grade, and so that's rather than say, ma'am? Yes, ma'am. Right, but in 4th grade, we'd have 10-year-olds, and so that's where we've placed the line, is at 4th grade.
Okay, but he just talking about 10, so I just didn't want him to think.
Right.
We're-
So 4th grade
Yeah, I
and
need
up.
to, I addressed his question and I incorrectly stated our expectation is 4th grade and above,
Right.
regardless of age.
Okay. Dr. Murphy, you said this was a work in progress and modifications need to be met. And also, I've gotten an email as a parent saying that I need to commit for the entire year as to whether I'm gonna have my child at home in virtual learning or in school. But many parents like me wanna see how this goes and plays out, as probably you all do too as a school board. So are we gonna all take that into consideration, or do we have to actually commit to the entire year?
What we're seeking is for you to make a decision to potentially commit for a quarter, not the year.
Quarter?
Yeah, and realistically, that gives a transition at a grading period. If we have a parent or a family that makes a choice and something comes up, things could happen where we have to make a change, and we'll deal with those on an individual basis even prior to the conclusion of a quarter. We just don't want to have the environment. We want to have some stability for our teachers to know whether they're on-site or virtual, and so we're seeking at least a quarterly transition at
Right,
this time.
that's understandable, but as a parent, it might not work out what I choose at the beginning, so I want the option to
Yes.
opt in. Is that available?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That will be an option.
All right.
Definitely at the quarter, and if you bring your situation to the principal, it could be even sooner than that if there is justifiable reason.
Okay, that's all I have.
Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you, first of all. You guys have been working so hard on this plan. I know you have. And I'm sure you're all very tired of hearing about COVID. I just have a couple of questions.
Sure.
And please feel free to keep the answers short. If I need more explanation, I'll ask, but you don't need to, go on about it if you don't feel the need to. The first one I have is, as the school administration, if a parent has the liberty to do either, they're a stay-at-home parent, they're in a position where they can do either, are you of the mindset that you would rather have that parent keep the kids at home so that you can socially distance the kids that don't have a choice and must be in school? Or would you rather that parent err on sending the child to school so that they can have continuance of education oversight by your board? Which one would you say to the parent who's on the fence?
I wished it was as cut and dried, either come or stay at home. I think if we're designing a model that's safe and we have a parent and a student that meets the criterion of the virtual model, and the parent is willing to actively engage, I think that best serves the full environment.
Okay.
But I would not want to penalize an individual family who, is kind of on the fence there, just basically because what you're asking would reduce the overall number of students in the classroom. It kind of addresses Mr.
Right.
George's question as to whether they're going to have to wear face coverings or not.
Okay, I hear you. The second one was we had talked about recess and PE and that is going to be available for the younger grades. However, things like a ball, a child bounces a ball, it goes to another child, that child touches the ball. So are we going to be able to have those types of things? What about slides and monkey bars and, you got kid after kid after kid touching that stuff. How's that going to work?
I know I'm going to kind of defer over here because my group that worked on the facility side of thing are tighter to those guidelines. I'm almost inclined to say that the balls are out, but you may have gotten further guidance since then, but kind of address recess, what we can and can't do is what the question entails.
Sure. So right now, you're correct. Balls would be out, and we haven't received any new guidance really in the last month regarding that. Cleanliness, we do have direct guidelines of what playground equipment looks like. Really on metal surfaces, not as plastic surfaces. I don't know what the CDC or ADH has exactly identified what needs to be cleaned first or the proper cleaning method, but we are advised to all playground equipment gets sanitized, and we purchased 6 backpack foggers. We'll be using Lemon Q, which is a CDC-approved disinfectant. A disinfectant sits with the playground equipment for 10 minutes. After the 10 minutes, it should all dry up and playground or recess can resume. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank
One
you.
last thing. Regarding the face mask being required, so we're talking about the 4th grade and up students. Let's say you have a student who maybe has a sensory issue or an anxiety issue and the mask is just causing them a lot of problems. Are there gonna be disciplinary actions for kids who don't wear a mask, or are those gonna be kids that parents just need to keep them home?
No, what we need to do there is if there's truly a medical condition that would prevent the wearing of a face covering, that has to be presented to the building level administration, and the nurse's office will review that. If it's confirmed that that child does not need to wear a face covering in that context, the guidelines do allow for us to allow that person to be on campus as an individual and not have to be isolated at home because of inherently their condition regarding wearing a face covering.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Let's go over here.
Okay, I am unfortunately a parent that is on the fence because I have a son in 5th grade and I want him to very much be a part of, he's always been a part of sports, but I have a 3-year-old with a breathing condition. And so my question is if I choose to do virtual for the first quarter to see how things play out, will my son still be able to be involved, and still be a part of the school? I know that y'all were talking about being able to log in classes and stuff like that. I really want him to be able to do that. But are y'all having sports? Is the athletics still approved?
Yeah, we really haven't detailed tonight. Yes, to answer your questions, athletics is a go. The governor said Friday, put your helmet on for practice and wear your mask after practice. That was the statement. How do you do both? Can you potentially be a virtual student and attend a portion of the day? I think that's going to be a possibility, and I'm going to kind of defer to Mr. Campbell because I know the academics area has been
Yes.
having some of these discussions.
So it's any band, choir, athletics. Now you're talking about a 5th grader, so that would be PE, Pee Wee, and that's totally outside of the school day. So we don't know where we are on Pee Wee athletics at this point, and we do not know where we are on Pee Wee athletics at this point.
It's the same as the high school, isn't it?
We do not know where we are on
It's the
Pee Wee
same as the high
athletics at
school.
this point, but that's all outside of the school day, so that would be just like it's always been for Pee Wee.
Okay, and I just got one more question. If my son does do the virtual, and he struggles with a particular curriculum, or however you say that, if I struggle with it too, but I want to help him, will there be any one-on-one for anyone for me to help me be able to help him?
Yes, ma'am. We'll have resources embedded in the Google Classroom that will provide either a video of the teacher or a video of the teacher and then additional videos that you and your son could watch and access to try to gain insight. And then there would be the ability to communicate with the teacher via email, and the teacher could Zoom you in.
Okay,
Or
cool.
you could have the teacher could email you some other tip to teach the concept. So there is that ability, yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
I also want to second the job you guys have done. I'm a grandparent supporting a 5th grader new to the district, and a lot of the questions we have were answered tonight, so thank you very much for that. And we were probably one of the 30% that was going virtual. We are coming from Austin, like Travis Ellis ISD, and we were on Schoology and Google School last year, totally paperless. And it really became a very smooth process. But I got to tell you, I was probably lulled to sleep when I'm sitting here hearing everything, not thinking about that the school district was 100% devoted to virtual learning during this time period. So having teachers in our neighborhood, we know how much effort they put into the agenda. And we probably had, it was mandatory. The kids didn't have to sign in, but there was quizzes throughout the day that they would take. It didn't matter if they took it at 10 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock at night, but that's kind of how they kept track, I think, of who was there. But the teachers put a lot into that, and they had Google Hangout required, not, I shouldn't say required, but it was twice a day for almost an hour to support the kids, to answer questions with the curriculum. But what we found was that most of the questions came from the technology side of the house. The online support and through Google School and Schoology, there's a lot of work that has to be turned in where they have to copy links, go from one platform to another platform to get that information. And probably 40 minutes of that hour that the kids could come back on to talk to the teacher on Google Hangout was the teacher explaining how to do the technical side. And I know our grandson is pretty much straight A student. He probably spent 30% of his time or 40% with support trying to figure out how to do the different things through the technical side of the house. So even though I was leaning towards the virtual, thinking about now that the teachers have a full curriculum here in the buildings, you know, and for them to, the reality to think that they could come up with a curriculum and support the students, that 30%, I'm not for sure that it's really feasible. And I know you guys are learning as we go. So I'm just not, I don't have the comfort level I had when I walked into the building on the virtual side, but feel much better about some of the other issues here in the building, what you're doing for COVID. So.
Thank you. Next question or comment?
Okay, I have a bunch of questions. I'll just tell you, I am one of the 25% that our kids are staying home. I have one going into 7th grade who is in athletics, who absolutely hates my guts right now because she's not coming back to school. I have a 2nd grader who's super smart. I don't know that the cookie cutter 2nd grade curriculum is going to be enough for him. He is that student that will finish it in one day and be done for the whole week. So as a parent, that's my job to go to Books A Million, go to Amazon, buy extra curriculum that I know is going to challenge him. As a stay-at-home mom, I'm fully prepared to do that. I have a 1st grader who struggled all of kindergarten year. He has severe ADHD. We spent the first half of kindergarten last year not absorbing any information at all because he's looking over here at a butterfly. We spent the second half trying to figure out what medication, what diet we needed to be on to get there. This summer, we have spent a whole lot of time doing remediation. That's my job as a parent. Your teachers aren't going to be able to teach an entire classroom, have blended, and then have online. I don't think that there is student accountability for K through 4th grade. My 1st grader doesn't have time management. He wants to go play outside. My 2nd grader is going to be accountable for turning in his work because he wants to be done. But that's my job as a parent. That's not the job of the teacher. If you're at home for whatever reason, the parents have to be on board and on top of things. I have to know what is required of my children. But in the same token, there's got to be open lines of communication between every single teacher that my 7th grader has with whatever teachers my elementary kids are going to have. So with that being said, a lot of tonight has been based on what the classroom at school is going to look like because we don't have all the answers for virtual. But my main question is we are on the fence of if my children are going to do virtual or if we are going to pull out and completely homeschool. And that is solely based on the fact of, is the virtual curriculum going to be 8 a.m. to 3:30 p.m.? Is it going to be we have to check in at this time, we have to check in at that time? I have 4 kids at home. That's not an option for me. I am the 13% that does not have any connectivity at home at all whatsoever. I will drive up to the school every day if you want me to download whatever curriculum that they need. But logging into a Zoom meeting every day, that's not going to happen. I have 3 in the school district. Even if you give me a hotspot per kid, if it happens to work at my house, I can't guarantee you that I can wrangle all 4 of them. You sit here and you do this Zoom call with your teacher. You got to be quiet, Bubba's on the computer. I mean, there's just a lot of factors that go into that when you have multiple kids and multiple grades at this school. I mean, I've got a first grader that apparently is going to use a program called Seesaw that I have never heard of. I have no idea how to use that. So I'm really hoping it's as super simple as Ms. Curry said it is, because I've already got to learn how to use Google Classroom. That's not something I've ever had to use. Last year it was, you doing your work? Yep, okay, cool, we're good. This is different. This is not review, this is curriculum. So how exactly are we expected to get this information? Are we gonna have a pickup day where we come pick up said hotspot and Chromebook and iPad? Because I'm looking at 1 iPad, 2 Chromebooks, and possible hotspots. When are we supposed to get those before school?
So once we get through the deadline of choice of
Okay.
which direction you take, then we will facilitate a process that begins to distribute equipment, and also probably some of the details centered around building your capacity to use those tools. So that's all a component of what would be the in-service to be that virtual mom at home. You know, to kind of go full circle to the other option, because we haven't discussed that option tonight, but an option for families would be to sign off on homeschooling paperwork and go a different route with curriculum and then re-engage if you choose to do so in the future. That's always something that a parent could do. Specifically what you've mentioned is you're going to try to do the virtual with our curriculum and have kids, you know, in different grade levels. And so with that, it'll probably be, I would say, somewhere around the 10th to the week of the 10th is when we'll have everyone back, so we know that we can begin to handle the logistics of that next week based on what we learned this week.
Right, yes, sir. That's what we're looking toward would be probably the week after next. That week that we would have started school, the week of the 17th, is when we'll try to schedule all the, for lack of a better term, intake with the folks who are choosing to go virtual. We'll run those through the media centers at each grade level and coordinate those meetings. Probably it'll have to be a one-on-one because of social distancing to be able, so we'll be going through it with every virtual parent that we have so that we can have a face-to-face, as close as we can, semi-training session to get you logged on, get you at least started.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And then my other question is, what are the restrictions for students who are doing virtual? My daughter's in 7th grade. She wants to play volleyball. Volleyball is a school class period. Right. Earlier you said it was first period. Is it going to be allowed for me to bring her to school for first period?
Yeah, it's not first period. 7th grade is 12:20, 12:10.
Okay.
Will
So
be
not
the
for
time that
7th
7th
grade.
grade athletics would be, and yes, you could bring her for that period. If you
Okay.
homeschool her,
Then
she
she-
is not eligible, and she would not be eligible for 365 days.
Y'all wouldn't be willing to waive that because of the.
That's
COVID
a triple A, that's
It's
not a,
AAA.
that's
Okay,
not
That's
an us.
AAA. That's what
Yes,
that's
ma'am.
one of my questions. So.
You can, which football player is it? Which one is that law based off of? Yeah, thank Tim Tebow for that one. Okay. We already had that conversation. Okay, so there's that one. Okay, so for virtual, is it going to be the core classes for virtual, or are they going to have virtual PE, virtual art, virtual choir, virtual band? What all is going to be virtual?
I would tell you core classes initially. We're going to attempt to do some other content areas, but it's,
Last week, all of our teachers were here building virtual curriculum. So there's a virtual PE curriculum ready to go.
So that's
There's
what
a-
they've been working on.
There's
I
a
know
virtual
they talked
elementary
about it.
art curriculum ready to go. Now, it's not deep at this point.
Right.
You know, I told them, when I was a first-year teacher, my only hope was to stay 1 week ahead. And that was all I could manage, was staying 1 week ahead in the 6 classes I was teaching. And that's what our goal is with this. We're trying to build the first quarter now, and then on our early dismissal Wednesdays, that will be a focus going throughout the year to build out the curriculum further and further and further. But we're trying to bank as much as we can now.
Okay, so with that being said, if there is going to be virtual art, For those of us who are doing virtual, do I still need to go buy the school supplies that are on the list to be able to have those supplies at home for whatever projects that they are going to be required to do while in virtual?
Yeah, I would say if you're going to be a virtual parent, if there's something on that supply list, the virtual student will more than likely, I can't guarantee it, but will more than likely need those supplies, just like the face-to-face student will need.
Okay.
Now, if there are specific supplies that we would supply, then that'll be something where we'll have to arrange a pickup for
Okay.
you to swing by and
For
get
like
it.
elementary manipulatives, like the counting blocks and the shapes, is that something that has been talked about as far as sending them home for students?
It hasn't been talked about, but we'll get it. Ms. Curry, you got that on you? Yep.
Okay, that is something that we discussed with some of the teachers. If they have extras, then we'd be more than willing to work with you and send those home. They'll also have a list of some common household items you may already have that you could use, like little pebbles, pennies, things like that.
Okay. What was your question? He asked me to ask something I already forgot.
I have a quick question about the virtual. What about the high school students, such as my daughter Emma, doing national park courses?
So I'll repeat the question. The question would be, if you're going to do virtual and you're trying to do national park coursework,
She won't be virtual, but I'm just asking, how is the school going to handle that with junior high and senior year students?
like juniors and seniors with national park, we will still send the bus over. And they're planning on doing on-site instruction, to my knowledge, and
At
that's
this
health
point, are you
doc
talking
and all.
about the career program? Are you in a career program? Or are you talking about college comp?
I'm just doing the aerospace program.
Okay, yeah, so right now, they're planning to do face-to-face out there, so you would either need to come here and get on the bus and go out there, or drive out there for that program. They're planning, as far as I know, at this point, they're planning face-to-face instruction for those programs. At National Park, yes, ma'am.
Okay, my last question was about the hotspot. So is it one per child or one per household?
We have not devised a method of distribution yet. The hotspot should be, you should be able to hook up at least 8 to 10 devices on a singular hotspot. So it's robust enough that one should be sufficient as a qualifying family for access to it, but we also we don't want to give it to you and it not work. So if the geography does not allow for it to function at your house, and we know that's a dark spot, we're not going to provide a hotspot with no connectivity. So that would be the 2 points in the check and balance there. But we do not have a specific detailed plan on how those will be distributed based on the number of them we have versus the number of people who may need them. So we're going to have to find out how many people need them, determine if we have enough of them available, and then distribute them based on connectivity and finance is probably the 2 elements that will go into that mix.
Okay, thank you. That's all of my questions.
Hi, I'm a parent. I have 3 children. I have a 5th grader and a 7th grader who are very excited to come back. They're very happy with the school. I have a kindergartner that is excited to start this year. The question I have is, will there be any COVID testing conducted at the school?
Right.
And once the vaccine is available, will there be any COVID vaccines conducted at the school?
Okay, to address the testing question, we've conducted some research around a possibility of having a device that could conduct some base level testing. As we sit here today, we do not have any method to conduct any type of test on site. We're leaving all testing of students for a potential test positive up to the clinics, the testing sites, and those areas. What you observed was the list of symptoms that our nurses will monitor based on, and our teachers will monitor, and then those students will be sent home and be encouraged to obtain a test through one of those testing site locations.
Okay, so if
that
my
was the
child is
testing
home, they will
question.
be sent home to me. They won't be kept for any period of time, they'll be released to me
Right.
right away.
Yes.
Okay, and if you do decide to do the on-site COVID testing, because things change.
Right.
Let's say you decided to do that. What is going to be your parent notification process? The one reason why I've been so happy with this school is the communication has been very great. No one undermines my parental consent. If there's an issue with my child, you know, I've never had any issues with my children, anything against my consent.
Right.
I don't want that to change because of a pandemic.
Right.
And as a parent, we need to know that answer.
Sure. And what I would tell you is we are in the process of developing, through a grant, actually bringing a physician on site for 2 days a week, and we'll actually, within a year, have a program through parental consent that if you wanted your child to see a physician, the availability of that would exist as a convenience to you as a parent, but it would not be a school taking on that role without parental consent. So parental consent, pandemic or not, will still be the first point. What I would tell you is if a child is continued to be symptomatic and there continues to be a very serious discussion and a parent is unwilling to get a test, then if we see those continued signs and symptoms, we may require for that child to, until they may have to take a test before they can come back to school.
Period, or after so many days? I mean, let's
Well,
say a person says, I'm not going to take a test, it's been a
Right.
month.
What we have to look at for is you know, there's going to be a parent ultimately that says, I'm not taking a test. But their child has a fever, they're exhibiting symptoms, we know they're exhibiting symptoms, and that parent is just going to play the course on it because they really don't want to know. And this too shall pass, and during that period of time where they're exhibiting symptoms, they're not going to be able to attend school.
Right, that's what I'm saying, but but the question was, it's been 30 days, the child is symptom-free.
Right.
Would you still require a test for that child to return back to
I
school?
don't know on the protocol, we really haven't gotten that deep into
That's something
the
we need to look
reattorney.
into, because
Yes.
that will occur.
Oh, yes.
And then the vaccine, would that be something you would be given in the school?
If we were given the latitude to provide a vaccine, we definitely would participate in assisting whatever process that the clinics institute. We have an RN and an LPN, and so we would contract with a clinic provider to conduct those vaccinations on campus as a point of convenience. Just like any other immunization, some are required. I think where it'll fall out is, will the Department of Health require a vaccination to attend school? That probably won't happen in this school year as something on the immunization checklist. I can't, you know, it could be. We'll see where that goes at the point in time. But with immunizations in general, we have a certain amount of requirements, and the flexibility is always given to the parent in terms of that process. I would tell you that if we were providing immunizations on campus, it would be through a third-party contact, not our nurses.
And we would have to have written consent for our
Yes.
child to receive anything. Perfect, thank you very much.
You bet.
My first question is, how do you spell the word curriculum?
Probably not correctly.
Well, I've tried to write it like 5 times tonight. Do what? C-U-R-R-I-C-U-L-U-M? Okay, great. That's good. Okay. Now for my serious questions. And I've let it be known that my biggest concern is the depth of educational content to be taught. Because I want my children educated, and I realize I may not be the majority, as some people just want their kids here, but I want education is very important to me. So, word on the street is that all schools, elementary, middle school, and high school, teachers are being encouraged by their administration to be facilitators, not teachers, in the classroom for on-site teaching. And I've heard it from elementary teachers, middle school teachers, and high school teachers. Dr. Murphy, you alerted to earlier that one of the biggest unknowns is the job of the teacher to juggle on-site instruction and virtual instruction and the handful of students who are now quarantined for 14 days, and then the new students who are quarantined for the next 14 days, and so on, because we all know this is a virus and people are going to get it. And Mr. Campbell, at one point tonight, you said that the on-site curriculum has modifications. I guess my question is, how deep are we going with content, new content, if, and I don't understand, why is on-site curriculum being modified? How are teachers who are supposed to be teaching virtually and my student in the classroom going to go deep in content? And, I mean, are the teachers being instructed by the administration of Fountain Lake School in all all buildings to be facilitators and not teachers? So that's my one question. Are they being taught, told to be facilitators, not teachers? And then how is a teacher going to teach my student not just the need to know, but the need to know and good to know, and the depth of his education be good enough?
And so in a non-pandemic environment, that will be based on the quality of the teacher, wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
And so during a pandemic environment, when we look at a facilitator of learning versus a teacher of learning, I view them to be equivalent, not separate unto. And so maybe there's a misconceptual idea around facilitating learning versus teaching, but I would be very clear that we would expect teachers to teach on a daily basis and provide the appropriate resources for a student to learn digitally on a daily basis.
While in class?
What's that?
While in class?
Yes. We've heard tonight that some kids may want to join the class based on a Zoom, so they may join in the class while someone else is teaching within the class.
No, I'm sorry. When you said the teachers would provide resources to teach them and digitally, I was saying, are you saying that the student, an in-class student, will be learning digitally with the teacher sitting there?
You know, I don't know how to define what's going to occur in the classroom based on where we're at, but I would expect the teacher to be able to get up and teach, demonstrate, provide examples, provide for guided practice, all of those components that we've experienced in the past. I would expect our teachers to be able to have a literacy circle where they're doing small group instruction. All of those things, I think, can be a component of learning during a pandemic. You know, how do we create something digital for expanding learning within the, you know, we are not indicating that, you know, I think the greatest concerns from a parent, virtually, they're going to have to fill some of those learning gaps. They're going to have to deepen the level of understanding from a virtual perspective, not on an on-site perspective. So I don't know that we're attempting to lessen the level of rigor. If anything, the intentional component would be to strengthen rigor, because we're going to be more reliant upon mastery and less reliant upon effort.
Okay, so the on-site, in-class instruction will be the same that it always has been, if you have a quality teacher.
That's our intention. I mean, we
So my kid is not going to be sitting in a classroom learning digitally and teaching himself with a teacher that he can ask a question to every once in a while.
Since the inception of a Chromebook and Google Apps for Education, it's been a supplement to learning, not a replacement to learning. And so whether we are digital, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, or during pandemic, a digital tool is a resource. It is not a replacement to instruction.
Okay.
So you're saying that they're not going to be in front of a computer being taught by whatever is on the computer. The teacher's going to be up in front of the classroom. If that was the case prior to pandemic, that will be what will happen.
Yeah, we've got some really neat examples where they're using Screencastify, and they may be scripting a example of work. And so the students are seeing it on the board, the electronic board, but it's being captured and it's uploaded into the Google Classroom. So a kid that wants to watch that whole lesson occur, they get a chance to see it later on. So we won't be able to replicate the entire experience, but for a virtual student, but I think we can benefit learning for virtual students but our intention is not to diminish on-site learning to accommodate virtual learning. And I think there's a misconception. We had teachers come in and begin to seek out digital tools for the intentional purpose of expanding resources for students. In no part of our work did we talk about reducing rigor or eliminating essential learning standards. We still have standards that need to be taught, and they need to be taught well, because our students are going to take an assessment test this spring.
I think they're saying it the other way, though. I think that they're thinking that maybe in the classroom, we're going to be changing the way that we're teaching in the classroom as opposed to the virtual students. So I think it's more or less, is my kid going to be at school on the computer watching what Cindy's watching at home? And that's how she'll be learning.
You know, I don't.
Am I right in that question?
Well, yes. And
So, Mr. Campbell, do you, or one of the principals want to kind of try to address kind of the intentionality of on-site instruction versus the virtual?
So probably the best example I can give you right off the top of my head is Carol Mercer will have a camera set up, and Carol Mercer will be doing Agri Labs on his table because he can't do it with social distancing and having the supplies and having kids touch the same supplies. And so the kids in the classroom will be able to see Carol Mercer doing that lab. The kids who are watching remotely or who are accessing it at a later time will be able to watch Carol Mercer do that lab. If there's something a kid in the classroom missed about that lab, or missed about that math lesson, or missed about that science class, then if that's captured and videotaped, or if there's a digital resource that supplements what the teacher did in the classroom, the student will be able to access those resources outside of the school day. Or if the teacher says, okay, now do your homework, and the kid thinks, well, I don't really understand that, and I've listened to her and I don't get it from her, so let me see if there's some resource here. So now I can watch a video from Khan Academy, which they could do prior to the pandemic, and some parents discovered Khan Academy during the pandemic and discovered that was, if they couldn't figure out how to do the lesson, then they watched the videos until they got it figured out. You know, I watched the video on how to replace the belt on the lawnmower last night, so I could replace the belt on the lawnmower. So I see those as additional resources, not as replacements, and they'll be available to the students who need them, whether they're face-to-face or remote. But I still believe that we'll have the depth and that we will have teachers facilitating learning in the classroom and outside of the classroom. And in a lot of instances, it'll be a video of the teacher doing that thing that the kid can go back and watch the night before the test.
So you're saying that
3 weeks later.
lessons will be pre-recorded?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Kind of break that down.
What I foresee is that there will be elements, and we've ordered cameras, we've ordered, they have it on their Chromebooks where they can hit record in a Zoom. So they'll record as they go for the lesson part. In some instances, I don't think they'll record every lesson every day, but they'll record the lesson, and then that lesson will upload into the Google Classroom and be available to be accessed again. But it won't be the instruction in the classroom. We'll be watching a pre-recorded lesson from Mr. Campbell. It won't be Mr. Campbell reciting to you all the parts of speech and how to dissect a sentence and any of that. It will be Mr. Campbell teaching you in real time if you are in the classroom. But there might be a video of it available later.
Okay.
Or it might be a video of someone else who's probably better at it than Mr. Campbell anyway that you can access later.
So to be clear, is this where the blended comes in at? So
Yes,
it's not
ma'am.
the intent of the school to replace the teacher with a resource. The teacher's going to be there, they're going to teach, but it's possible that on some things it's going to be part of the teacher's day curriculum that you watch a video of a demonstration, additional help or whatever on the computer, just as part of how she teaches her class.
And in
He
some
or she.
classes, that's
Okay.
already the way it was before the pandemic. You know, if you're in Mr. Bellamy's science class, he's got slideshows and they're active videoed slideshows, and that's what you watch for his class. He lectures over the slideshow, but that slideshow's in your Google Classroom, whether you're there for the lecture or not.
Okay. I think too, Dr. Murphy, I just wrote down a word whenever you were speaking a minute ago before Mr. Campbell added to it, but it was misconception. So I'm also on the Guidance Coalition Committee, and I would just say to the administrators of all buildings, it has been stated to me by multiple people that teachers are that's their interpretation of it, that they are being instructed to be facilitators, to sit and let the children do the digital, to learn the stuff digitally while in the classroom and not be hands-on teaching, talking, learning, like last year's school was. So if that is a misconception to the teachers, I mean, it's getting back to the people of the community, the parents, and everybody. So anyway.
I want to applaud you for bringing it to our attention, because that is definitely not our intention. And
Good.
hopefully this conversation's provided additional clarity on the role of a teacher on site.
Right. Okay, thank you. I just have a few more questions. If we wanted to do the K-12 Lincoln Learning, which is virtual school taught by an academy or other instructors, not Fountain Lake teachers, who do we go to? You or our school level?
Probably at this point in time, any specific request if someone's seeking to use that state product with using their teacher, I think that probably needs to be at a district level until we flush out what the volume would be, because you and I had that very discussion today, that we're uncertain on the comfort level of parents based on the virtual curriculum and whether the Lincoln program would be a better solution. At this point in time, if you want further interest in that, I would direct any of those to Mr. Campbell, and let's determine a database and the volume of how we can deliver on that option.
Yeah, so that'd be the admin building. That's where you would need to go.
Yes, building 1.
Okay. If we were going to do virtual for Fountain Lake and wanted to sign our children up for the GT program or athletics, whatever, do we go to the specific teacher who teaches GT, or do we go to the school building level or building level?
That would be the building. You would
Okay.
check in with the building and you would be building a schedule just like you would if you were on campus.
And is now a good time for that? Or are y'all wanting us to do that in 10 days? I mean, because I know y'all are busy and
Right.
trying to.
We'll be, as I said earlier, week after next, we'll be setting up those appointments for the intake for the virtual folks to set up what their courses would look like, what classes they need to be enrolled in.
Okay, and you said this one time at the very end of it, the elementary recess will be in pot, like sections?
Ms. Curry, kind of elaborate on the dialogue that we've been having and what different elementary schools are attempting to do to provide some opportunities of free play.
Okay, I'll try to answer that question as best as I can. We're still working on the plan. That's a great question. You know as well as I do how constrained elementary is on play spaces. So we have 2. If you include the preschool, that's a 3rd space. So some schools are dividing those into quadrants and letting 4 classes play at a time, but 1 class would be in one quadrant, 1 class would be in another. Right now, I'm trying to devise a schedule with the teachers when they come back on campus next week as to where 1 class could use the whole play space by itself, therefore they could use the blacktop and or the playground, clean in between. 10 minutes later, another class comes out. So that may be us really kind of working those schedules on making sure only 1 class is out there at a time. That being said, we have 25 classes K4. So that's a lot of space to make sure we work out. But that's my intent, so that they can have a play with their friends in their classroom and not have to be divided into quadrants.
And then, Mr. Campbell, you had said at one point that middle school might eat lunch and then stay put. So does that mean then you said, I think they might have recess, they may not, maybe one grade per day or whatever. So at this point, is middle school recess still unknown also?
Yes, ma'am. It's
Okay.
still unknown because of what it would look like. How are you
Right.
gonna, because if we have 25% of the middle school stay home, you still have 150 kids in 2 grades at lunch at the same time. And are you gonna let them run wild on the field for 20 minutes and then try to contact trace if somebody tests positive?
Ideas that other schools are implementing regarding that could be that it becomes more of a once a week or twice a week experience after lunch, and it could very well be that the A through whatever, L, gets access in grade 5, and they get access, everyone else stays put. On Tuesday, the rest of the alphabet in grade 5. On Wednesday, grade 6. So there's different ways to allow for them to, they won't be able to have it every day like they have in the past. So it'll be a plan of staging that and then balancing that with how we conduct contact tracing within those specific groups, because if we allow the grade level free play, then we move closer towards more students having to self-quarantine for that period of time.
Okay, I have one more question and then one more comment. If we go virtual Fountain Lake, we can come back to school. Or if we start a school, we can go virtual Fountain Lake, and pretty much within reason, if whatever, it's not working for us. If we do virtual, do like this K-12, is that something that you can go back and start one way and come back? And then the same with homeschool. Say I pull my kids and I'm like, you know what, after 9 weeks, I'm tired of them, send them back to school. Can I do that? Is it all flexible, or is it just the on-site and off-site with Fountain Lake that's flexible?
The only area that we will need to research further in placing you back in on a quarter would be Lincoln. I think all other scenarios will work with individual parents. Right. In terms of placement.
Even homeschool?
The thing, yes, ma'am.
Yes.
The thing we don't know about Lincoln is how that would match up to our classes, because you'd be going from Lincoln to Fountain Lake. And
Right.
so how that matches up, and it may match up just fine to go from one to the other, but it may be a significant gap that we'd want to really look at the point in time that we make that switch.
Okay. I've said it and I will say it again. I do not envy any of you in your positions, and I'm very thankful for your dedication to Fountain Lake students and our community. And you're all in my prayers, and I just hope we're a very good 2020 and 2021 school year. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I've already asked my questions. I just got a suggestion and a comment. Mr. Campbell, you've never been a week ahead. You're lying. To all you school board members, other states are doing a Monday, Wednesday at school, Tuesday, Thursday online. Is that an option for us? Have we considered this? Because I know as a parent, having a child, it's important to have a social interaction, but I don't want my senior daughter to be in a prison-like situation, having to wear a mask all day. So is this something that y'all have considered or are considering?
So at this point in time, kind of where I opened in terms of the plan design was to provide an option for consistency for the community. At this point in time, we're either 100% on campus or 100% virtual. I do know that other schools are looking at the 2-day-a-week option. At this point in time, we just chose not to muddy the water any more than what we have shared this evening until we kind of get both feet on the ground with our staff and our parents. And then could that be something, if we're in this for the long haul and we find that might effectively help us manage class size, we may be right back in this room in 3 weeks when we look at numbers and we can't effectively manage class size, and then we look at an option
A
such
third,
as that.
a
to
third, a
reduce
third
class
option
size.
might be perfect. I mean, you know what I mean? A
Right.
third option might be perfect. So y'all are willing to look at that and get your boots muddy a little bit?
Right.
And talk about it?
It's
One of the,
definite-
I'm
Go
sorry, I was just say, one of the concerns, Clint, on that is the working parent
Right.
and where do their kid go the other 2 or 3 days a week, and so that,
But, I
that
mean,
was,
that's a third option that we would
Yes,
have
it
the
is.
choice to choose and instead of all or all, you know what I mean?
I got you.
Okay.
I got you.
Thank you.
I just have a few quick questions. So our kids, I'm sending my kid to school. That's my choice. If he comes in, his teacher has to be quarantined, not because of a kid in the class but outside. Are y'all gonna bring in a sub, like a certified sub? Like who's gonna teach those kids for 2 weeks?
So this may be a little bit where Lindsay's discussion, because we were talking with teachers a little bit, we still feel the teacher that we have is our best option to deliver to students. And so we have talked about, could our teacher self-quarantine for 14 days, Zoom into the class, and at least provide support to those students above and beyond what a substitute could do. I
If
think
they're
that's
capable,
all
if they're
relevant
not
based
sick.
on grade level. I think depending upon the grade level, it may or may not be realistic. You're probably going to struggle to do a small group reading circle remotely. A substitute, on the other hand, will probably struggle to do that small group reading circle in the same regard. We have significant concerns on our staffing model. We really haven't talked much about the staffing model and the consistency in that for the semester. But that is a valid question, and what I would share is that we would have a substitute while that individual teacher is away, and probably digitally bring that teacher into the environment if they were not ill and were only self-quarantining.
So are the substitutes available? Because I've heard that is an issue.
That's going to be yet another issue, yes, ma'am.
So would y'all just tell our kids, well, we don't have anyone to teach your class, so y'all therefore have to go home for 2 weeks and do online?
Right. You know, what we don't want to do is to begin to speculate in terms of where that's going to fall out, to send a mixed message of uncertainty when right now we know there's a substitute shortage, but we're not indicating to our community that we will not have substitutes available. I think that is a bridge we cross when we don't have substitutes.
Okay. You had mentioned that the pickup times may be staggered. As a working mother and a husband that works full-time, when are we going to get this information so that we can try to make a necessary arrangements?
We plan to have, following this meeting, we have an 11:30 meeting scheduled tomorrow with the leadership team to really focus on the routines around school. And you know, hopefully by the end of this week, we can have a definitive plan for rolling everything out. We do think that our buses, because of high school credit, when he's staggering that release time, in our mind, the K, all of our very small children, pre-K through 4, might go and be released early. Then we release all of our bus children, and then we release the secondary closer to the 3:30, and then that staggers the students leaving. Plus, we're very concerned about just the length of the car rider line, with 50% plus of our population now choosing to be parent drop-off and pick-up full-time.
So drop-off, are y'all expecting like staggered drop-off times?
No, we're going to take, you know, the only thing that I would tell you, we don't know if we're going to tell you 7:40 or 7:30, but nothing before 7:30.
Will
I can
faces,
say that.
will faces be available after school?
At this point in time, I think we're a thumbs up based on your last conversation, but that program typically does not get started, and that first interval doesn't occur until roughly after Labor Day.
Actually, normally it starts the week after Labor Day, but because of the increase in movement of the start of school back, you're actually going to start the day after Labor Day.
So anyone listening, the FACES program would plan on starting the day after Labor Day. September 8th is what you see there. Thank you.
So y'all may have answered this and I may not have quite understood. If your child is considered being in contact and they have to quarantine for 14 days, if after 7 days they go and get tested and they're negative, do they still have to quarantine for the additional 7 days?
That's a very good question. We experienced that with our first test positive. The answer to that is they have to remain quarantined for the full 14 days,
So then.
regardless of the result of the test.
So then getting a test will not be necessary
It
if
would
they.
not minimize the length of time of the quarantine.
Okay. And then, did I hear you say that y'all do have AC in the PE building now?
Yes, that is a conditioned space now, yes.
Okay. That's it?
I just had one more quick question about the staggering on the pickup times. For parents like me with 3 children, I've got a kindergartner, a 5th grader, and a 7th grader. Am I gonna have to come up there 3 different times to get my kids?
We are trying to devise a process to definitely take care of K through 4. We have really looked at, could we take those children in the middle school, because they would probably have to miss their project class. That would be, you know, if you pick them up early, they would miss the last period of the day, and that's typically the project class. It wouldn't be core instruction, but it might be something they don't want to miss. With our high school kids, the reason we're trying to keep that closer is that is for credit, and so therefore we are a little reluctant to release them any earlier, but possibly a middle
5th and
school
7th
child
might be
could ride
workable.
home in the stagger of elementary, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You bet.
Randy wants to know what the penalty is for not wearing your mask.
It's a very good question. I can show you some really neat videos on exemplifying mask wearing in student populations. The penalty to that would be, you know, education. So it begins in the element of a level of understanding on the why. I think that if there's been anything missed from schools not being in session is the ability for K-12 public school to help educate the rationale for the face covering. Beyond that, it would be a warning. It would potentially result in disciplinary conferences. It could result in being placed in school suspension. It would be an escalation of the intentional violation of wearing the face covering, just like any other policy that the Board of Education sets forth. And it would be progressionary in nature to result ultimately in a virtual school option because you could not comply in the regular school.
Controlled by the teacher in the classroom though, correct?
Yeah, it would start at the classroom level, just like a child that's disruptive, up out of their seat, bothering others. If the teacher can't handle it, the first thing the teacher's going to do is get a hold of the parent and say, hey, we need your help here, and let's see if we can get this resolved.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody, for coming and providing some dialogue. Oh, there's one more question. Oh, a question.
Long-time caller, first-time listener. The one question that I did have, or it's actually not a question at this point, I think it's important for all of us to understand that there's not a single school in this district or this state whose plans are going to look the same now that they do after the first week of school. As fluid as this is, the people sitting up here with Mr. Campbell and everybody putting these plans together, it's not something that they want to be doing. So there's a lot of unknowns with this. My question is with the contact tracing. I know you and I have already had this discussion with the state. Do you see that being an incurred cost going down through the semester, through the school year, with it being something that the state has admittingly said that they can neither manage nor maintain? Is that something that you see being an extra expense as we move down the pipe?
You know, the expense will not be anything beyond if the assignment of designee, possibly it requires a stipend. This contact tracing point of contact has to be available technically 24/7 for a 10 o'clock phone call at night, and then you initiate what it's going to look like to conduct the contact tracing. From a school's perspective, we'll be able to get on it as soon as the next school day occurs, and potentially it could be that we start that dialogue even on a Saturday based on our situation so that we can be prepared for the following Monday. The intent behind contact tracing is to minimize spread. That's the intention behind it, so the ability to react to it. The biggest concern, if we can lobby for support, is we need for the Department of Health to make sure that when they're doing community tracing, they are articulating potential self-quarantines that would involve the school-age population of a student. And right now, in our dialogue, we're lobbying for that, and we do not have a definitive answer. The definitive answer today would be is that there is not an obligation for that group to communicate with the school, but there's an obligation for the school to communicate with the Department of Health.
And I push that dialogue up as well from my channels. And I can tell you that from the 911 administrator for the county side of this, it's extremely slow. The testing, the identification,
right,
the notification that comes subsequently with that, it's extremely slow. I've had multiple employees that have tested positive, so with that I gain a little bit of insight, and I'm privy to some information that some may not be, is I get to see when this person tested. I get to know the time frame, date and time when they received their positive diagnosis, and I get to see when that individual's information goes through the channels of the state, and oftentimes it's weeks if it ever shows up at all. So that is going to be a very fluid and unknown circumstance as you come down. I did want to answer one of your questions that you had. This morning, the Department of Health, the local health unit there on Malvern Avenue next to the county library, said that they would welcome any and all students that they felt need to be tested, appointment, walk-in, whatever. So faculty, students.
So what you're alluding to is a testing site on Malvern Avenue that would welcome students and faculty as they're at no cost, or?
This morning, no cost.
Okay.
That was the statement that came out in this morning's meeting.
Okay. So, you know, and I think what we're going to find is a continual reaction to administrative concerns, community concerns, as well as the Department of Health having concerns based on their degree of staffing. And just to echo, there was a concern there as to the latency in time as we contend with this process. And we've seen this latency in time based on the Department of Health dealing with this solely through community spread without re-engaging 400,000 students into this same process of points of identification. That's why they're adamant that the school has to take on a role in the element of contact tracing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Madam President. Is there any other words from the Board of Education? I appreciate everyone's patience, your comments, very well taken, and we have streamed all of this live, and we will have it recorded and posted so those who were unable to view this evening can view at a later date. So your questions helped us meet our objective of strengthening community interest and communication.
Anybody have any other questions? Hori? No? Oh, no. Oh, it's dead. Okay.
So is it safe to say, I know this has been asked like 3 different times, but say you do have a 2nd grader, a 6th grader, and a 9th grader, and you get staggered times. Where does that 2nd grader go while he's waiting on the 9th grader to get out?
Well, as we've kind of looked at it right now, we would go ahead and take all of them out of the system, excluding the freshmen, and let them go home. There may, depending on what the last class of the day is, that freshman may have, depending on the class, if there's not a significant concern for credit, we could restructure the schedule, we could do some different things to accommodate that individual situation. Hypothetically speaking, Mr. George.
Hypothetically, yes, Mr. George. Anybody else? Thank you guys so much for coming. We do have a couple more things on our agenda, but we're going to take a small break, and then we will come on back and finish it up. Thank you. Okay, we're back. It's 8:03. We have some personnel items. So, Brian, if you will read those items for us, we would appreciate it.
Certainly will. We have a motion to hire the following for the correlating positions for the upcoming 2020-2021 school year: Sean Murphy, District Aide; Amanda MacArthur, District Aide; Elizabeth Curlin, Front Desk Secretary.
Any questions for any board members? I have just two, actually. The district aides are for what position? Like, I know it's a district aide position, but where will they be placed? We talked about it, I think, in a couple meetings ago that we would need them, but I didn't.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Curlin is being transferred from a paraprofessional position to the front desk secretary, and so we ended up with 3 paraprofessional openings. 2 of those were special ed openings, and 1 was the library aide, and so we're shifting everyone's responsibilities around in various ways. And again, it's going to be dependent upon who actually appears on campus as to who we need. But we're planning on using those 2 kind of to tag team at different times of the day in the opportunity room. So we'll have a male presence in the opportunity room and a female presence in the opportunity room at different times in the day. And then they'll have other duties throughout the day that they have to do.
Gotcha. So the motion is to hire the following for the correlating positions for the upcoming 2020-2021 school year: Sean Murphy, District Aide; Amanda MacArthur, District Aide; and Elizabeth Curlin, Front Desk Secretary. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. None opposed. Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, we've got a motion to recommend a non-renewal of the 6-hour bus contract for Debbie Hood for the 2021 school year.
Any questions from any board members? Okay. So the motion is to recommend a non-renewal of a 6-hour bus contract for Debbie Hood for the 2020-2021 school year. All in favor say aye. Aye. None opposed. Motion carries 5-0.
Motion to recommend a non-renewal of the 3.5-hour bus contract for Otis Brashears for the 2021 school year.
Any questions? Motion to recommend a non-renewal of a 3.5-hour bus contract for Otis Brashears for the 2020-2021 school year. All in favor say aye. Aye. None opposed. Motion carries 5-0.
Motion to recommend a non-renewal of the 7.5-hour bus contract for Carla DeArmond for the 2021 school year.
Any questions from any board members? Okay. Okay.
Didn't we talk about on that one, getting back and figuring out what we could do to make up the difference?
Yes, yes. The question was, could we make up the difference or a portion therein? Just for anyone listening, we intend to allow for the continued work to occur on a timesheet, so the work performed will make up a portion of the difference. It doesn't make up all the difference based on the days. The other thing that we were looking at doing was extending, in that situation, work between noon and 3:30 to actually work on the campus in another role. If they want to work, that would allow them to continue to work throughout the day versus having to leave. So we kind of left that on the table. The only other option that we kind of discussed in that regard would be, and I don't have it in the form of a motion tonight, but that would be to pay driver time and sit time at driver rate of pay for the National Park route. Those are really the only, right now, as we discussed back in June, all driver rate of pay is at a singular rate of pay that's equivalent to regular route pay. And then when the driver is not driving and they're sitting, it's a reduced hourly rate of pay there. So that's what we have at this point in time.
What timeline or what kind of crunch are we in if we were to toss the idea of tabling this I'm kind of with Corey. We had a long meeting about this, and there were several options, and we were gonna hear from another supervisor, and I'm
Be-
just uncomfortable.
Be careful what we talk about,
Yeah.
you know, in open session.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a little uncomfortable with not really knowing once we non-renew what 100% I mean, because when we do this and we just go down the line and do the 3 hour, I'm just kind of technical in that way, is we don't have anything in front of us that's gets to where we talked, you know, about what those duties or what might happen. So kind of looking for your guidance if this was something that might not fully occur.
Well, I mean, the recommendation is to allow for each of these positions to fill out a time card during the school day. So the route itself will be under the contract of the length of the route. Any work performed in the school day will be the equivalence of on a timesheet based on the work performed. Any additional modifications, the only two options that would be available for me to make recommendations would be specific to the national park route, being one of them. And then the other option would be extending opportunities for employment, which I have already talked to supervisors on both sides. We're more than willing to extend that because we feel that we will have custodial needs above and beyond the one additional person we hired. So, you know, that's something that we can definitely have as an option for that individual. If they want to do that, we're willing to offer it. It does not require board action to offer that position, but I would tell you that we've discussed it and that could be offered to help make up the difference.
I think you just want to be sure that that is offered, and so he's telling you that it would be, right?
Yeah, that was the
Yeah,
main
yeah,
concern,
yeah,
is
yeah.
I'm just uncomfortable
We
with
just
the
want-
way it is
Stated on here
and
because
even though
that's missing.
The extra may not be
Let's-
approved, it was, I mean, need our approval, it's.
But could there be a day where you say Monday from 12 to 3:30, we don't need you?
This is going beyond what we can talk about in open session, I think. I think this is directly related to
I
a
agree.
personnel matter, and we can't discuss this in open session.
I agree.
So I'm gonna ask Cindy to just
Do y'all want to break
call for, no, I mean, I'm gonna ask you to call for a
or
vote.
call for a vote? Call for a vote, okay.
I mean,
So motion to recommend a non-renewal of a 7.5-hour bus contract for Carla D. Arman for the 2020-2021 school year. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay. 2 oppose, motion carries 3-2.
Motion to recommend a non-renewal of the 4.5-hour bus contract for Jay Shapiro for the 2021 school year.
Any questions from any board members? Okay. So the motion is to recommend a non-renewal of a 4.5-hour bus contract for Jay Shapiro for the 2020-2021 school year. All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries 5-0.
Motion to recommend transferring Debbie Hood to a 4-hour contract for the 2021 school year.
Any questions? Okay, the motion is to recommend transferring Debbie Hood to a 4-hour contract for the 2020-21 school year. All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries 5-0.
Motion to recommend transferring Otis Bashirs to a 2-hour bus contract for the 2020-2021 school year.
Any questions? Okay, motion is to recommend transferring Otis Brashears to a 2-hour bus contract for the 2020-21 school year. All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries 5-0.
Motion to recommend transferring Carla D. Arman to a 3-hour bus contract for the 2020-2021 school year.
Any questions? Okay, motion is to recommend transferring Carla DeArmond to a 3-hour bus contract for the 2020-2021 school year. All in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, was that just one aye? Was all ayes? I'm sorry, any opposed? Okay. Motion carries 3-2.
Motion to recommend transferring Jay Shapiro to a 2-hour bus contract for the 2021 school year.
Any questions? Okay, motion to recommend transferring Jay Shapiro to a 2-hour bus contract for the 2020-2021 school year. All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries 5-0. And our meeting is adjourned.